Our protagonist and his sister possess an ability everyone dreams of, immortality. However, it was a curse rather than a blessing, as they were exploited by members of a guild that claimed to be humanity's saviors, but were, in reality, nothing more than monsters. These guild members killed our protagonist and his sister countless times to gain experience and level up. One day, the siblings finally managed to escape, and our protagonist resolved to expose the truth about these imposters to the world and make them pay for what they had done to them. Our story begins amidst intense events, placing us right in the heart of a decisive battle that not only impacts the lives of the protagonists, but also determines the fate of everyone. We see the Demon King seated on his throne, surrounded by strange and terrifying creatures, while one of our heroes stands before him. It quickly becomes clear that this hero is named Sia, a skilled swordsman. At that moment, the battle begins, and Sia lunges forward, attacking the strange creatures with his sword. He swiftly proves his exceptional swordsmanship, managing to take down a large number of them. Then, he calls out to one of his comrades to join the fight. This comrade is revealed to be a massive warrior named Shikara. However, when the two attempt to attack the Demon King together, they are taken aback by his violent response, unleashing a massive burst of fire, warning them against arrogance, as they are nothing more than insignificant beings compared to him. At that moment, a sorceress appears, conjuring a massive ice barrier to shield them from the raging flames. It is soon revealed that her name is Aya, a member of the hero team. She smiles, assuring them that none of them has suffered even a scratch. Sia responds, admitting he owes her for saving him, while Shikara comments that even with the barrier, the damage. But before he can finish, a pair of hands suddenly reach out toward them from behind. The owner of these hands hands Sia and Shikara healing potions to treat their wounds, and it is revealed that his name is Taro. After drinking the potion, Sia and Shikara turn to their fifth comrade, asking if he is ready to fight now. This comrade is revealed to be the leader of the team, Haruto, who immediately steps forward to confront the Demon King. The Demon King is taken aback by Haruto's overwhelming power as their battle unfolds. The scene then shifts to a new setting, where people celebrate upon hearing the news of the S-rank hunter guild, known as Byakuren, successfully defeating the Demon King. It is revealed that the portal from which these creatures emerged had remained open for nearly 200 years, allowing monsters to threaten human lives throughout that period. The news broadcast announces the victory of Byakuren's members over one of the 7 Demon Kings, highlighting the magnitude of this achievement. Next, the scene transitions to the streets, where a reporter named Sato meets the members of Byakuren. The heroes, led by Haruto, are greeted by cheering crowds celebrating their success. Sato then approaches to interview the heroes, congratulating them on their victory over the Demon King. Speaking on behalf of his team, Haruto thanks her, emphasizing that their achievement was only possible because of the support they received from people all over the world. Sato then asks how they attained such immense power, especially as S-rank hunters. However, the entire team suddenly falls silent, as if unsure of how to respond. But Haruto quickly regains his composure and answers that their strength is simply the result of their daily training, of course. After the interview, the team appears in a different location, where Sia laughs sarcastically at Haruto's response, remarking that his mention of daily training was nothing but a joke. Shikara, also laughing, replies that Haruto wasn't entirely wrong. The sorceress Aya then chimes in, asserting that they do, in fact, train hard every day. Following this, the alchemist Taro smirks and comments that, in the end, it's their job, and there's no escaping it. Haruto smiles and tells them that what they do is of great importance, then asks if they think otherwise. But suddenly, he calls out to 2 individuals, referring to them as monsters. At this moment, 2 people are revealed, chained to the wall, a young man and a girl. It is soon revealed that the young man is named Makoto, while the girl beside him is his sister, Minori. Their exhausted expressions make it clear that they have been imprisoned in this place for a long time. Hatoro and the rest of the team approach the 2 brothers, and when neither of them responds, Hatoro remarks that some beings can be quite stubborn at times. He then tells the brothers that thanks to them, he and his team have grown stronger, and their power continues to increase. After that, he steps closer, expressing his gratitude, when suddenly, Makoto delivers a powerful strike with his sword. Everyone is taken aback as they realize that Haruto has managed to counter Makoto's attack decisively and without hesitation. It becomes clear that in their world, strength and experience are not gained simply by fighting ordinary beings. The only way for a warrior to level up is by facing specific creatures. However, there is one exception. Defeating beings that do not perish naturally may contribute to increasing a fighter's strength. Indeed, moments later, Makoto regains his composure as if nothing had happened. Haruto then stands, smiling, pleased with his newfound power and the progress he has made. Hatoro wipes his sword clean and tells Makoto that their ability to recover grants them limitless opportunities to refine their skills. At this moment, The brothers Makoto and Minori appear completely drained, unable to keep up with their opponents. Shikara then steps forward and begins attacking them with overwhelming strength. In a swift moment, he inflicts serious damage on one of them without hesitation. The sorceress Aya then intervenes, unleashing a powerful surge of fire energy toward Minori, significantly weakening her. After some time, the two regain their strength, and Taro approaches Minori, forcing her into a new challenge to test her endurance. Meanwhile, Sia turns toward his brother Makoto, pushing him to his combat limits. Once everyone reaches the levels they were aiming for, Haruto declares that their training for the day has been successful. However, Shikara responds that it is still not enough, and that he is determined to become even stronger. Aya sighs, calling him obsessed with power and admitting that she is exhausted. Sia adds that he too has had enough for the day and needs some time to relax. But then, they notice Taro sitting in front of his computer, looking uneasy. When asked if something is bothering him, he reveals that he has recently been struggling to gather information as efficiently as he used to. Sia advises him to take things easy, reminding him that he has been working hard and should enjoy himself a little. Taro then turns to Minori, presenting her with a new challenge, but he feels that everything has become repetitive and dull. Haruto pauses for a moment and tells them that things have become monotonous for all of them. He then looks at Minori, who is chained before them, contemplating the situation. After a brief moment, he approaches Taro and suggests that there is one thing they have yet to try, testing a new aspect of her abilities. Taro looks at him in astonishment, as if hearing a brilliant idea, then smiles and praises his intelligence. He adds that their focus has always been on combat, but they have never considered other ways to enhance their skills. He then approaches the sorceress Aya and asks her to use her magic to assist them in this new challenge, to which she immediately agrees. She begins chanting a spell to test its effects, but suddenly, Minori appears fully aware of what is happening around her and what they are planning to do. At that moment, Sia interrupts them, suggesting that they should pause for a moment before announcing his desire to join. Aya laughs, saying that everyone enjoys a challenge. However, she is even more surprised when Haruto tells her to release Makoto from his restraints. When she asks him why, he smiles and replies with amusement that watching his sister go through all of this without being able to intervene is quite intriguing. Haruto continues, saying that this will be quite an exciting show. Aya follows his orders, and Makoto suddenly finds himself freed from the restraints that had bound him. The moment he finally feels his freedom, he sees his sister being taken away. He quickly tries to get up and chase after them, shouting for them to stop. But before he can move, Aya uses her magic to restrain him, preventing him from advancing. Haruto stands, laughing mockingly at Makoto, telling him that tonight he will watch the show from a different perspective, explaining that sacred magic, unlike fire or other attacks, has a unique effect. He adds that the restraints he now suffers from are preventing him from restoring his strength. Makoto, overwhelmed with frustration and anger, shouts that he will never forgive them and will find a way to put an end to all of this. But before he can finish his sentence, he is suddenly silenced by Haruto's sword, rendering him unable to speak. Haruto stands over him and tells him that it's better for him to remain silent, as tonight is not a night for words, but for watching. He then adds that if Makoto wants to blame someone, he should blame his own fate. Makoto, feeling utterly powerless as he watches what is happening to his sister, hears Haruto telling Taro that they need to leave now because they have a busy day ahead, including important meetings abroad. Taro responds by saying that he also needs to return to take care of some unfinished business. Haruto laughs as he exits the cell, teasing him for being the only one concerned about such matters. Taro replies that everyone has their own way of thinking, then adds that they haven't placed any new restraints on the siblings. Haruto replies that if they wake Aya now, she will be furious, and in any case, they won't be able to escape from this place easily, but he instructs Taro to make sure the cell is securely locked. After that, Makoto is seen lying on the ground, still bound by the magic preventing him from moving, feeling immense pain. Suddenly, he feels a hand pulling the sword from his body, the pain surging as it is removed, and he realizes that it was his sister, Minori, who did it. However, he is even more shocked when he sees her taking the sword and pressing it against herself. He shouts at her to stop and not to harm herself. But Minori is in a deeply distressed state, feeling overwhelmed by everything she has endured. She struggles to fight against her emotions, repeatedly saying that she can't take it anymore. She then pleads with her older brother, Makoto, to find a way to end the suffering she is experiencing. At that moment, Makoto recalls Haruto's words about the pain he is feeling due to his halted regeneration, and realizes that there may be a way to free his sister from her agony. He asks her to use the weapon to sever his arm, believing that it might be the solution. Minori hesitantly takes the weapon to carry out his request, but she hesitates and tells him she can't bring herself to hurt him, then apologizes for being unable to do it. But he reassures her, explaining that their bodies, as immortal beings, only regenerate when they face fatal damage, urging her to continue and fulfill his request. She hesitates for a moment before finally cutting his arm, overwhelmed with deep emotional pain, apologizing again for causing him such suffering. Makoto tells her she is doing the right thing, then asks her to strike his heart next, assuring her that this will allow him to return even stronger. Driven by her desperation to restore her brother, Minori forces herself to follow through, stabbing his heart with the weapon. But at that moment, she is suddenly overwhelmed by a powerful surge of energy emanating from his body, and she is even more shocked when a notification appears, indicating that her level has increased. At that moment, Makoto has completely restored his body and stands up again. Minori, still stunned, asks him why her level increased. That's when Makoto finally understands what has happened. Minori also comes to understand what this means, and asks her brother if he realizes what she is thinking now. However, Makoto disagrees with her thoughts, and tells her that she cannot do that. But she clarifies that she is not thinking of having him kill her, but rather that he will use her to kill them. She then tells him that they must take revenge on all of them for what they have done. Makoto hesitates at first, but when he recalls everything he and his sister have just endured, he decides to go along with her plan, telling her they will execute it immediately. And so, the two siblings take turns killing each other repeatedly. First, Makoto kills Minori, and then Minori kills Makoto in the next round. They continue this cycle over and over again without stopping, growing immensely stronger through the pain and suffering they endure, all in pursuit of their revenge. The story then shifts back to the beginning of Haruto's team at the Byakuren Guild, where Taro was known at the time as an S-rank member responsible for carrying the team's equipment. He was known for his quiet personality and was often regarded as a coward. However, those who knew and interacted with him understood that he was an enigmatic individual who was difficult to comprehend. 3 years before the present events, Taro was at the guild, securing a creature onto a dissection table as he prepared to examine its body. At that moment, Haruto entered and remarked that Taro was truly dedicated to his work. Taro was surprised that Haruto had come to him just to say that, but Haruto went on to say that his work was fascinating. He then asked Taro if he would be interested in dissecting something even more intriguing. Intrigued by Haruto's words, Taro followed him to a secluded room in the guild, one that was rarely entered by others. Before entering, Haruto had already gathered the entire team and asked them if they desired fame and glory. They did not understand what he meant by this, so Haruto clarified that from this moment on, they would have the opportunity to step into the spotlight and make their presence known. He then continued, saying that the future ahead of them was open and filled with a glory that no human had ever reached before. However, he added that the condition for achieving this was to be trapped in the darkness, with no way to escape from it ever again. Then, after revealing this truth, he asked them if they still wished to stay with him and choose the path of glory he was offering. Shikara immediately responded, saying that they were all undoubtedly with him and that they shared the same goal. Sia affirmed Shikara's words, expressing his agreement. Haruto then opened a door that led to a staircase descending beneath the room they were in, instructing them to follow him. He assured them that he would lead them to a future filled with fame and recognition. Without hesitation, Haruto led the way down, with everyone following behind him. Taro admitted that he had never known such a place even existed. Shikara speculated that this underground space was likely used by the guild in the past to imprison its enemies and those who opposed it. Haruto then opened another door, an electronic one that could only be unlocked using the fingerprints of all 5 of his fingers. The others stood behind him, still uncertain about what he was about to show them. The moment the door opened, Haruto presented them with Makoto and his sister Minori, revealing that he had kidnapped and restrained them inside this chamber. The entire team was left in shock at the sight of the 2 captives. They immediately voiced their concerns, telling Haruto that this was not a good idea at all. However, Haruto reassured them, urging them not to worry. He then explained that although Makoto and Minori may resemble humans, their blood was entirely different. He stepped closer to the captured siblings and revealed that they were members of the Immortal Clan, a group thought to have gone extinct. Suddenly, he drew his sword and struck Makoto, slicing through half of his face without any hesitation or regard for him as a person. He then told the others that Makoto's body would now regenerate the damaged part. Stunned, the team asked him if the Immortal Clan, which was believed to have perished, still existed. They were fascinated by the revelation, but did not understand how this connected to the glory Haruto was speaking of. At that moment, Haruto raised his phone and told them to take a look. He then explained that the application he was running on the device was a level measuring app, something that had been present since the time he had joined the guild. The application categorizes a member's rank based on their physical strength and magical power, allowing them to fight against ferocious creatures. He then explains that this guild is classified as rank A, meaning that if a member's level is below 20, they cannot join. However, what surprises the team members is that Haruto's level has now reached 50. Haruto continues, explaining that the usual way to increase one's level is by fighting and defeating monsters, but this is dangerous. If a fighter is not cautious enough, they could lose their life. He then clarifies that they can use these individuals for that purpose. At that moment, Minori is stabbed in the stomach with a sword, the blade piercing through her body in front of their eyes. He then tells them that they can now raise their levels easily. The first to be excited by this revelation is Taro, who exclaims to Haruto how incredible it is. He then pulls a knife from his pocket and approaches Minori, expressing his great enthusiasm for understanding the structure of the human body and its weak points. He stabs Minori with the knife and asks her how it feels before continuing to stab her frantically in different parts of her body over and over, questioning her about the sensation of her body being torn apart. Afterward, he realizes that his level has indeed increased, filling him with overwhelming joy. He then steps closer to Minori again, removes the blindfold from her eyes and face, and expresses his admiration for her beauty and his immense happiness. He then asks her to tell him more about herself. After that, he resumes tearing her body apart with frenzied excitement, wondering whether she would survive if she were poisoned or anesthetized, or if her brain were separated. He also ponders how long she could stay alive if her organs were offered as food for insects. Witnessing this scene, Shia comments to the siblings that they truly resemble immortal monsters. He and the rest of the team then smile, agreeing that since they are not human, treating them this way is acceptable. Meanwhile, Haruto watches them, enjoying the brutal torture inflicted upon the siblings, encouraging them by saying that they are doing a great job. He then turns to Makoto and Minori, telling them that handling them is easy and that their usefulness will greatly benefit the team. Returning to the present, this is the day when the team departs for the interviews Haruto mentioned. At the airport, Shikara is dressed in a formal suit, expressing his surprise at being part of this interview. Aya responds by asking whether muscular individuals like him feel uncomfortable wearing formal suits. Meanwhile, Shia is preoccupied with observing everything around him and asks where Taro is. Haruto replies that he is certainly with his doll bride and wants to continue his new experiment. Shia remarks that he seems full of energy. Later, at the guild building, Taro has returned to resume what he was doing. He enters his cell, laughing with excitement. He opens the door and addresses Minori, saying that he has finally arrived and that he has come to see his doll bride. He apologizes for leaving her alone. However, he suddenly sees Makoto holding a weapon and using it to kill his sister, Minori. At this moment, it becomes clear that they have been carrying out this process since the previous night. Taro screams, asking what he is doing and begging him not to kill his doll bride. He then adds that if she dies, the potential result of the experiment conducted on her yesterday might be lost, referring to the pregnancy Haruto mentioned at the time. But suddenly, the siblings rise to their feet in front of him, leaving him in shock at their current state. The night before, they were in a state of extreme weakness, but now they are entirely different. It becomes evident that when a fighter defeats a creature of equal or lower strength, they gain only limited experience. However, if the defeated creature is stronger than the fighter, their experience level increases significantly and rapidly. Since the siblings continued to kill each other repeatedly, each of them exceeded the other's level with every cycle, causing their levels to rise dramatically. This rapid increase in strength is what caused their bodies and muscles to transform in such a short time. At that moment, as Taro began to process what he was witnessing, fear gripped him, and he stepped back, trying to leave the room, completely unable to comprehend what had happened to these creatures. He continued retreating until he reached the stairs, muttering that something needed to be done immediately. Then, turning toward them, he stated that he did not understand how they had broken free and taken on this form, but he warned them that escape was not an option. He kept backing away until he reached a switch labeled Danger, which he quickly pressed. At that moment, another door opened, revealing an enormous beast. Standing beside it, Taro told them that they had no chance of escaping, and that he and Chimera would kill them once again. It was then revealed that the supposedly gentle Chimera, whom he had intended to feed, was the very creature that had been torturing Makoto and Minori. However, Makoto and Minori showed no fear. Instead, they decided that the time had come to take revenge for all they had suffered at the hands of these monsters. Makoto stepped forward, standing before the beast, while Taro stood behind it, directing it toward Makoto and Minori in an attempt to intimidate them. Makoto then reassured his sister, asking her not to worry and telling her to step away from Chimera, promising that he would handle everything himself. Hearing this, Taro burst into loud laughter and mockingly asked whether Makoto truly understood the situation they were in to say such words. He then added that Makoto was facing him alone, while he had Chimera by his side, meaning that Makoto had absolutely no chance of winning. At that moment, Chimera grew even more enraged, prompting Taro to calm it down, assuring it that Makoto was nothing more than a meal. He reassured it that he would provide it with plenty of good food. He then turned to Makoto and Minori, stating that they were merely food and that it would be best for them to remain shackled, silently offering their experience points to increase their level. After that, he laughed and looked at Minori, saying that they could enjoy themselves even more by having her mate with Chimera. Minori's shock deepened as he expressed his curiosity about what kind of offspring would result from the union between Chimera and a member of the immortal tribe. At that moment, Makoto placed a barrier between Minori and the others, glaring at Taro with intense rage, declaring that he would kill him, but Taro only laughed hysterically again, challenging Makoto to try, adding that Makoto was nothing more than food to them. At that instant, Chimera's fury reached its peak, and it lunged toward Makoto with incredible speed. It struck him down, revealing that its tail was, in fact, a massive serpent. Makoto was taken aback by Chimera's immense strength and astonishing speed, which he had not anticipated. Suddenly, hands wielding a knife appeared, stabbing into his body, an attack orchestrated by Taro, who was using the same ability he had previously employed to administer treatment to Shia and Shikara. However, he could not see Makoto clearly, so he was stabbing using a partial teleportation technique, warning him not to attempt an escape. It was then revealed that when a person's level increases, they may acquire unique skills. These skills vary from person to person based on their combat role, experience, and origin. Since Taro was responsible for various tasks, he had acquired multiple abilities, including elemental manipulation, pharmacology, monster training, and assassination. The ability he was using now was the creation of portals between two separate locations, not only useful for transferring objects, but also for assassinations, making it a rare skill. Thanks to the combat prowess he had gained from defeating the Demon King, he now possessed the strength to qualify for an S-rank guild. Makoto found himself trapped between Chimera on one side and Taro's invisible attacks on the other. Suddenly, Chimera's serpent-like tail coiled around Makoto's leg and hoisted him upside down into the air, while at the same moment, Taro severed both of his arms. Chimera then attacked him with its enormous claws, which dwarfed Makoto's body in size. Taro laughed once more and taunted Makoto, saying that no matter how high his level rose, he would always remain a weakling with a mere regeneration ability, nothing more than a food source to help them grow stronger and gain more experience. At that moment, Minori stood watching the events unfold, filled with fear for her brother as he faced both the monstrous Chimera and the deranged Taro. Chimera's rage had reached its peak when Taro told Makoto that survival was now impossible, then commanded Chimera to devour him. The moment Taro gave the order, Chimera lunged at Makoto and began attacking him. However, after consuming part of Makoto's body, Taro noticed that Chimera appeared fatigued and soon stopped eating. Moments later, he was stunned to see Chimera collapse to the ground, a green substance seeping from its mouth, its body lying motionless beside Makoto, who was drenched in a pool of blood. Taro rushed toward Chimera to check what had happened, only to be shocked when Makoto suddenly stood up again and told him that he had been trying to avoid this outcome, but now there was no other choice. Taro then realized that Makoto had regenerated his limbs and the parts of his body that had been severed or consumed. He then informed Taro that he was the one who had killed Chimera. Overcome with fury and grief for his beloved beast, Taro lashed out in a blind rage, repeatedly stabbing Makoto while screaming at him to die. However, Makoto calmly told him, "If you lose too much blood, you'll die." Taro froze in confusion at his words. It was then that he noticed a wound on his hand, coated in the same green substance he had seen dripping from Chimera's mouth before it died. Suddenly he collapsed to the ground in front of Makoto, screaming in agony, crying out that his body was burning. At that moment, it became clear that as Makoto's level had risen, he had acquired a new skill, Poison Infliction. This ability transformed his own body into a lethal toxin. He then informed Taro that his very blood had become the deadly poison that was now consuming him. But Taro refused to believe it, insisting that members of their tribe could not acquire additional abilities beyond regeneration without extensive training. Makoto, however, told him that he had never needed training, reminding him that he had been poisoned by him hundreds of times before. He then grabbed Taro's own knife, made a cut on his hand, and let his blood drip onto Taro, telling him that he was merely returning the poison that had once been inflicted on him. After that, he delivered a powerful kick, sending Taro flying across the room. Makoto approached him and stated that they had stolen the peaceful life he once had, and no one had ever stopped what they were doing to him, despite his screams of pain. He then added that he was not the only one who had suffered. His younger sister Minori had also been a victim. With that, he delivered a forceful punch to Taro's stomach. By this point, Taro was in a pitiful state, on the verge of death, and began pleading for help with his final breaths. However, in that moment, Makoto used his regeneration ability to heal Taro's wounds and keep him alive. Taro was stunned upon realizing that Makoto had saved him, and he asked why he had done it. Makoto simply told him that the reason should be obvious. He then continued, stating that Taro's suffering and wounds had not yet satisfied him. The fire inside him was still burning. He added that he had always wondered how they had felt when they sliced his body apart piece by piece with a knife, and that now he would let Taro experience the answer for himself. He would teach him the meaning of karma. The scene then shifts to Haruto and his team as they return to the guild building, joking sarcastically about what Taro might have done with his toy. Haruto then instructed Shia to go and find Taro, as it was getting late, and they had yet to celebrate their victory over the Demon King. Shia entered the building and called out for Taro, but as he arrived at the scene, he saw Chimera's lifeless body sprawled on the ground, blood splattered everywhere. He called for Taro again, asking what had happened. Yet, no response came. Suddenly his eyes caught sight of something that made him freeze in place, overcome with terror and disbelief. It was then revealed that he had seen Taro's mutilated, blood-drenched body hanging in the very cell where Makoto and Minori had once been imprisoned, with blood dripping beneath his feet. The scene shifts back to the past, revealing that Shikara was once an S-rank warrior specializing in martial arts, and considered one of the strongest fighters in the Byakuran Guild. He was known for being highly passionate, willing to risk his life and sacrifice himself for his comrades in the guild. However, those who knew him well were aware of his cunning nature, which was difficult to comprehend. He was admired by his peers, who wished to attain his strength and possess a physique as powerful as his. However, they understood that no matter what they did, they would never be able to reach his level or develop a body as formidable as his. At the time, Shikara overheard them discussing him, and told them that his muscular build was the result of constant training, encouraging them to keep working hard. He then walked away while they all admired him, vowing to follow his advice. Shikara felt pleased knowing that they looked up to him, seeing him as a role model, and often expressing their desire to become heroes like him. However, it is revealed that a year earlier, he had derived great pleasure from torturing Makoto and Minori, believing that any training that yielded quick and tangible results was the most effective. For this reason, he continued to kill them with increasing brutality each time, convinced that this was the optimal way to train. He laughed mockingly while tormenting Minori, stating that gaining more strength simply by killing monsters like them, who could not even defend themselves, was absurdly easy. Thus, he persisted in executing them through savage methods to raise his level and further enhance his physical power. However, over time, he became frustrated that progressing from one level to the next was taking longer than before, though he acknowledged this as a natural consequence of his increasing strength. While torturing Makoto and repeatedly killing him, he grew bored because Makoto was unable to resist, making the process less entertaining. Although he struck him violently and demanded some reaction to satisfy his ego, Makoto remained silent. This led Shikara to resort to even more brutal and merciless methods, as he wanted to hear the screams of Makoto and his sister. Indeed, he escalated his cruelty, beating and executing them in the most gruesome ways imaginable. Feeling a twisted satisfaction, he began counting the ribs he had broken that day, reaching a total of 200 fractures in a single session. He then turned to Minori again, ordering her to scream louder while he continued breaking her bones, demanding that her cries be pleasing for him to enjoy. As he intensified her torture, he tore her body apart mercilessly, forcing Minori to scream at the top of her lungs, which brought Shikara immense pleasure. He continued tormenting the siblings in each other's presence, and, in the end, ordered them to put on a performance for him before he left. The scene shifts back to the present, where Shikara is seen lifting weights, showing off his strength to his comrades, when suddenly, Shia rushes in to inform him that something terrible has happened. Shikara immediately stood up, and the group hurried together to the cell, where they were met with the gruesome sight of Taro hanging, his body covered in wounds, blood dripping from every inch. Haruto demanded to know where the siblings were, to which Shia replied that he had no idea. When he arrived at the scene, neither of them was there. He then turned to Haruto and added that if their actions were exposed, it would be a global scandal. Meanwhile, Shikara began shouting, calling out to Taro and urging him to stay alive and not die. At that moment, his gaze fell upon Taro's laptop, which was still powered on. When he approached and looked at the screen, he discovered that everything that had happened to Taro had been recorded. Overwhelmed with emotion and seething with rage, he turned to the rest of the team, declaring that the siblings had subjected Taro to this horrific torture and that they had to seek revenge and kill them. However, in the next instant, the entire team was stunned when they saw Haruto draw his sword and pointed at Taro. They all shouted for him to stop, but their shock deepened as they watched him strike, severing their comrade's neck in a single, decisive blow, ending his life instantly. Shikara stepped toward Haruto, grabbing him as he demanded an explanation for what he had just done, emphasizing that Taro now had no chance of being healed or returning to them. At that moment, Haruto told him that keeping Taro alive would have only meant prolonging his suffering. When Shikara attempted to argue, Shia supported Haruto's decision, explaining that Taro, in his current condition, had no chance of survival. The sorceress Aya then added sorrowfully that Taro had endured brutal torture, and that even with magic, she would not have been able to save him. Shikara then collapsed in grief, crying and screaming, vowing to kill Makoto and Minori in revenge. As for Haruto, after severing their comrade's head, he stood in a daze, silent and unresponsive as Shia called his name multiple times. When he finally acknowledged him, he simply asked why he was calling, but Shia dismissed it, saying it was nothing, and fell silent. Haruto then addressed his team, stating that it was now time to announce the death of Hiro Taro, who had protected the world. Shia asked if they should arrange a funeral first, but Haruto refused, insisting that they would broadcast the news of his death immediately. The scene shifts to Makoto and Minori, fleeing from the guild building, running through the forest in an attempt to remain hidden. Despite their strength and the levels they had reached, Minori was still weak due to the prolonged period she had spent shackled and tortured, causing her to collapse. Unable to continue running, Makoto reassured her that she didn't need to push herself too hard, and advised her to sit and rest for a while. They both sat down, overwhelmed with joy at finally escaping. Minori, overcome with emotion, said that they had finally broken free from the hell they had endured for so long. She then began crying as memories of their suffering resurfaced, prompting Makoto to comfort her, telling her that it was all over now, and that from this point forward, he would be able to protect her properly. After a short while, exhaustion overcame Minori, and she fell asleep, resting her head on her brother's lap. Makoto realized just how drained she was. However, he couldn't help but feel uneasy, unsure of when those monsters would decide to come after them again, or how they would track them down. Because of this, he knew he couldn't afford to sleep. He had to stay vigilant and keep watch, but exhaustion was weighing on him heavily. Eventually, he succumbed to sleep, but after a short while, he was jolted awake by a strange movement around them. Opening his eyes, he saw figures moving in the area. He quickly got up, trying to determine whether a threat was approaching, stepping forward cautiously to get a clearer view. A strong, sinister energy filled the air, making him decide to leave Minori sleeping where she was, as it would be safer for her while he investigated the situation himself. Moving swiftly and cautiously, he headed toward the source of the ominous energy. From a high branch in one of the trees, he spotted a particular location that seemed to be the origin of the malevolent aura. He knew the chances of being detected were high, but before he could react, he was suddenly ambushed from behind by one of the figures he had seen earlier, who drove a knife into his neck. Makoto fell immediately from the tree due to the force of the stab, and found himself surrounded by a group of fighters. Their aggressive demeanor was evident as they began closing in on him. At that moment, Makoto asked them who they were. No one answered, but one of them said, "This is the man we're looking for." Another added, "The woman they mentioned isn't with him, but capturing him alone is worth 500 million. That's more than enough." The sorceress among them then stated that they needed to finish the job quickly, before casting a spell to enhance the strength of all the men with her. As her magic spread, the entire group received a power boost, fueling their aggression as they prepared to attack Makoto. One of them, wielding an enormous club, stepped forward and delivered a powerful blow to Makoto's head, then continued striking him repeatedly to ensure his death. However, they were all left in shock when Makoto began moving again, still alive despite the brutal beating he had just endured. Their disbelief was evident, particularly on the sorceress's face, as she had been certain that he had perished after the devastating blows he had sustained. Makoto stood up once more, firmly planting his feet on the ground. He glanced at those surrounding him, and asked whether they were working for the Byakuran guild members. When no one responded, he simply stated that their identities didn't matter to him. Suddenly, he caught the large man who had struck him earlier off guard, landing a powerful blow that sent him crashing to the ground. Standing amid the stunned expressions of the rest of the group, he declared in a resolute voice that anyone who harbored ill intentions toward him was his enemy. At that moment, two attackers charged at him simultaneously, and one managed to sever his arm with a sword, pausing afterward to laugh and boast about his achievement. However, Makoto immediately grabbed his severed arm. Then, in a shocking display of strength, he used it as a weapon to strike one of his assailants with a devastating force, leaving everyone in utter disbelief. He then launched a relentless assault, taking down each of his opponents one by one until all of them lay on the ground. Only the sorceress remained standing. Turning to her, Makoto remarked that she was the last one left. Unwilling to give up easily, the sorceress resorted to using purple light magic, summoning a powerful bolt of lightning and hurling it toward Makoto. Feeling a surge of pride and satisfaction, she told him that no matter how fast he was, he would never be able to evade her attack. However, when she saw him rise again as if nothing had happened, fear took hold of her. She asked him who he really was. Unable to comprehend what was unfolding before her, she attempted to strike him again with another bolt of equal power, but Makoto did not back down. He charged at her, furious. Realizing that he was closing in on her, she tried to flee, but Makoto told her that he would not let her escape. Sometime later, Makoto was seen having tied up all his opponents, hanging them from the tree branches. He then took some of their clothing, including the sorceress's attire. Feeling pleased when he found clothes that fit him perfectly, He looked at the captives before leaving and told them that he had spared their lives, so they should not cross his path again. He returned to his sister, who was still asleep but stirred upon sensing his presence. He apologized for waking her. She reassured him that there was no need to apologize, saying that she was fine. Then, she asked him where he had gotten the clothes he was wearing. Not wanting to scare her or reveal the truth, Makoto simply said that some kind people had given him the clothes. Minori believed him and felt happy for him, but her joy grew even more when he told her that he had brought her some clothes as well. After receiving the clothes, Minori stood at a distance to change, while Makoto turned away to give her privacy. He then informed her that as soon as she was ready, they needed to leave and get farther away. With that, Makoto and Minori resumed their journey, carrying the weapons and supplies they had taken from the attackers. They walked for a long distance, and Makoto thought to himself that the farther they got from their enemies, the better their chances of survival. Eventually, they reached a waterfall, and by then, exhaustion had caught up with them both. Makoto suggested that they take a short break there. They sat near the waterfall and lit a fire to keep warm. Makoto then opened the bag he had taken with him and found some food inside. Minori's eyes lit up with delight when she saw some sweets. Makoto handed them to her, and she happily thanked him. As they ate together, Makoto reviewed the items he had obtained from their attackers, some weapons and emergency tools. However, he found no useful information among them. Because of this, he told Minori that he would need to return to the city to gather any information that might help them. He prepared to leave, explaining that he also needed to find more food to last them for a while. Before departing, he instructed Minori to stay well hidden, and she assured him that she would do as he asked. The scene then transitions to Makoto arriving in the city, where he was captivated by everything around him. He made his way to the market, where he sold some of the equipment he had acquired. He was pleasantly surprised to find that its value was far higher than he had expected. Afterward, he entered a shop to purchase what he needed, feeling relieved that he now had enough money to properly feed his sister. Once he had finished shopping, he sat on the street, contemplating his next move. His thoughts drifted toward the members of the guild, and he realized that Taro had merely been a tool in their hands, while the real monsters were the others. If he wanted to take revenge on them and make them suffer as he and his sister had suffered, he first needed to uncover each of their weaknesses. Suddenly, as Makoto sat deep in thought, he spotted a blimp soaring over the city, broadcasting a live transmission of Haruto and his team. He listened as they announced Taro's death, describing him as an important comrade and a wise supporter, claiming that he had died after enduring brutal torture. They then displayed an image of Taro, vowing that they would not rest until those responsible for his murder were brought to justice. When the public learned that Taro had been tortured and killed, a wave of outrage spread, as he had been beloved by many. Haruto then revealed images of Makoto and Minori, declaring them to be the criminals who had murdered Taro, with their names written beneath each picture. At that moment, Makoto realized that the people who had attacked him in the forest had indeed been working under Haruto and his team. Haruto then directed a message straight at him, asking if he was watching, making it clear to Makoto that he would never be able to escape, no matter where he ran, and that he would be punished for what he had done. The crowd erupted into cheers for Haruto, demanding vengeance for their fallen hero, and there sat Makoto among them, silently witnessing everything unfold. Through Haruto's actions, Makoto understood that he was merely trying to cover up his and his team's crimes, using this elaborate deception to manipulate the public. Anger surged through Makoto as he watched, vowing that he would expose Haruto's true nature and utterly destroy him. 6 days had passed since Makoto and Minori disappeared, and Haruto and his team were gathered, deeply troubled. In the scene, a man was tied up as Shikara ruthlessly beat him, punishing him for failing to provide any useful information about the siblings' whereabouts, indicating that they had hired him to track them down. The sorceress Aya stood up, remarking that their team's levels had increased significantly, perhaps making mercenaries like him unnecessary in the future. However, Shia sat anxiously, his growing concern evident, fearing that their actions would eventually be exposed to the world, leading to their downfall. But Haruto reassured him, stating that there was nothing to worry about. He then explained that they had already taken the necessary measures to prevent a scandal by pinning all the blame on the siblings and accusing them of killing Taro. Not only that, but they had also placed a 500 million bounty on their heads, ensuring that no one would believe a word they said, because to the world, they were now criminals. Shikara, however, snapped back at Aya, demanding if she meant they should abandon the hunt for the siblings after what they had done to Taro. She quickly clarified that she did not mean that, but Shikara's fury only intensified as he declared that they had tortured their comrade Taro in the most brutal ways, and he would never forgive them for it. At that moment, it became clear that several other individuals were bound and present in the room. Shikara's anger overflowed into tears as he swore that he would not rest until he captured the siblings again and made them suffer a fate far worse than anything they had previously endured. Aya attempted to calm him, assuring him that she understood his emotions, explaining that Taro had been the weakest among them, which was why he had been targeted. But Shikara grew even more furious, demanding that she not speak ill of Taro. In response, Aya used her magic to bind him in chains immediately, instructing him to calm down. She then stated that she did not believe the siblings posed any real threat to them. Shikara, however, vehemently disagreed, shouting that it was not about whether they were a threat, it was about what they had done to Taro. At that moment, Haruto stepped in, attempting to defuse the situation and ordering them to stop their bickering. He then pointed out that the message written in blood on the cell walls had clearly stated, "I will kill you all," which meant that every single one of them was now a target. Despite this, he reassured them that there was no reason to worry, because the siblings would eventually show themselves to accomplish their goal. He further added that the whole world now supported them, and after they had spread the siblings' images and issued a massive bounty, any news about them would reach them immediately should anyone spot them. Shikara reluctantly agreed, admitting that what Haruto said was true, but, before he could continue, Haruto cut him off, emphasizing that worrying and fearing the worst would do them no good. He reminded him that they were the world's heroes, and their priority now should be preparing to defeat another demon king. He then concluded by stating that it would be best for everyone to calm down and end this discussion, as they were all exhausted after everything they had been through in the past few days. He insisted that they should rest for now and resume their work later, but despite this, Shikara remained restless, unable to think of anything other than his relentless desire for revenge against Makoto and Minori. No matter what happened, he would find a way to make them pay. The scene shifts to Makoto and Minori, who are still near the waterfall. As they wake up, Makoto asks Minori if she slept well. She laughs and tells him that she had a wonderful sleep, thanks to the illusion spell, which she finds fascinating, adding that she was able to rest without having any nightmares. Makoto responds that this is very good, and since they have rested well, they need to leave now. Staying in one place for too long could lead to their capture. Minori then points out that they are now wanted criminals, and if they were to be caught. But Makoto cuts her off, telling her not to worry about anything. He then takes a mask out of his bag, explaining that if they wear these masks, they will be able to conceal their faces while still maintaining clear vision. Both of them put on the masks, and Minori comments that they are indeed useful, noting that this way, no one will be able to recognize them even if they are surrounded by enemies. Makoto then stands up and tells her that they should get moving, but Minori asks if they have a specific destination in mind. Makoto replies that they do, the dungeon. It is revealed that the dungeon is a separate world hidden behind a portal, distinct from the real world. The laws of the real world do not apply to those who live within it. Additionally, ordinary people are not permitted to enter, as the dungeon is known for its treacherous terrain, making it an ideal hiding place. Finally, they arrive at their intended location inside the dungeon. Makoto states that, according to the dungeon guide, the poison swamp is located at the highest peak of the mountain standing before them. This place is notorious for its extreme danger, which is why hunters rarely enter it. For that reason, Makoto believes it will serve as a suitable base for them. They climb the stairs leading to the portal that separates the real world from the dungeon. Makoto reassures Minori, promising that no matter what happens, he will always be by her side. He then takes her hand, and together, they step through the portal. They cross safely, and when Minori sees the place, she is mesmerized by its eerie beauty. But Makoto quickly informs her that everything around them is laced with deadly toxins. He further explains that they are the only ones who can safely enter this area, and reminds her to remain constantly vigilant. He also points out that while hunters rarely venture into this area, if one of them possesses magical immunity to poison, they could easily track them down. Makoto begins preparing their base, stepping onto the grass beneath his feet. However, the moment he does, a closed flower blooms, releasing toxic seeds toward his face. He swiftly warns Minori and explains what just happened. She agrees with his assessment and emphasizes that they need to be extremely careful, but suddenly, a look of fear spreads across Minori's face as she spots something terrifying. She gestures for Makoto to see it for himself. When Makoto turns in the direction she is pointing, he is shocked to see massive monsters standing right before them. He quickly tells Minori not to worry and assures her that he will handle the creatures himself. However, at that moment, one of the monsters lets out a thunderous roar and appears ready to attack. Makoto swiftly moves to strike first, keeping it away from his sister. He successfully defeats the first monster and then stands beside Minori, reassuring her that he can handle these creatures now that he has taken one down. But in that instant, the second monster ambushes him and swallows him whole in a single second. Minori is left in utter shock as she watches half of her brother's body disappear, with only the remaining half standing before her. However, moments later, Makoto's body begins reconstructing itself, returning to its normal state once again. He then attempts to counterattack the monster that had swallowed him, but quickly realizes that dungeon monsters possess a level of strength and speed unlike anything he has faced before. After several attempts, Makoto pauses to consider that this monster is completely different and far more powerful than anything he has faced before, whether with Taro or his beast, Camera. At that moment, Minori begins using her magical abilities to prevent the creature from harming her older brother. Following this, Makoto feels a surge of strength within him, wondering if his sister's magic has somehow enhanced his body. However, the most bizarre part is that he notices his severed hand, which had fallen to the ground, moving on its own. He stares at it in shock, but at the same time, he senses a strange feeling in his hands and feet, questioning whether this could be. To confirm his suspicion, he stands before the monster and issues a command to move. To his astonishment, the severed hand on the ground responds to his command, crawling towards the monster's mouth and prying it open wide, without Makoto physically doing anything himself. Seizing the opportunity, Makoto gathers all his strength and delivers a devastating blow inside the creature's open mouth. He succeeds in defeating it, but as he stands there exhausted, Minori asks if he is all right. Gasping for breath, Makoto reassures her that he is fine, though a bit drained. However, his mind remains fixated on his severed hand, trying to understand what just happened. Soon, he realizes that this is a new ability. He then starts wondering whether he acquired this skill due to Minori's enhancement magic, but in the end, he decides that this newfound power will be of great use to both of them. We transition to a new scene, where a month has passed since Makoto and Minori escaped from the Byakuren Guild. A group of warriors is seen battling massive beasts circling around them. Then, Shikara appears, carrying an enormous boulder as he advances toward the monsters. Once close enough, he hurls the massive stone at one of the flying creatures. It strikes the beast directly, sending it crashing to the ground. He then charges at another monster, gripping its wing with immense force. He successfully takes it down as well, causing his level to increase instantly. At that moment, the warriors accompanying him watch in awe, with one commenting that such strength is expected from Shikara, as he can vanquish these monsters effortlessly. Another admits that they could never pull off such a feat. Later they light a fire and sit down to eat together, but Shikara seems lost in thought. His mind is preoccupied with the whereabouts of the two siblings who vanished. One of the warriors reassures him, saying there is no need to rush, as rumors suggest that every hunter is searching for them due to the bounty on their heads, meaning they will inevitably be found. Then, another warrior shifts the conversation to something even more intriguing, mentioning that he has heard from a friend about a masked man performing astonishing feats and possessing immense power. He goes on to say that just a day ago, his friend was on his way to the poison swamp area to clear out monsters when he caught sight of this mysterious figure. According to him, the masked man took down the poison swamp serpent with nothing but his bare hands, without using any tools or weapons. Shikara reacts, stating that the poison swamp serpent is classified as an A-rank beast, with venom so deadly it can kill a mountain elephant. His comrade responds, affirming that he cannot imagine anyone other than Shikara himself being capable of defeating such a lethal creature. However, Shikara replies that the world is vast, and it is not surprising that there are other powerful warriors they have yet to hear about. He then declares that if someone truly managed to kill that serpent with their bare hands, he would certainly want to meet them. Curious, he asks when exactly this event took place, and his comrade informs him that it happened 3 days ago. Shikara then speculates that this person might still be in the area, but his companion expresses concern, warning that the poison swamp is an extremely toxic and dangerous place, and that they should. Before he can finish his sentence, Shikara suddenly lands a powerful punch straight to his face. He then grabs him by the collar and declares that they are heading to the poison swamp immediately, ordering everyone to prepare for departure. With excitement gleaming in his eyes, he adds that this is going to be thrilling. We then shift to a new scene, returning to the poison swamp. Makoto and Minori are there, but suddenly Makoto senses something happening around them. Minori turns to him and asks what is going on, but Makoto does not respond to her. Instead, he swiftly leaps onto the nearest tree to see who has arrived at the swamp, sensing an unsettling presence in the area. Indeed, the energy he feels is familiar, one he knows all too well. He immediately realizes that the newcomer is Shikara. Makoto quickly descends from the tree and informs Minori that he is going to confront him, but she, feeling afraid, pleads with him to stay with her. However, as always, Makoto reassures her, telling her not to be scared or worried, reminding her that their strength has grown significantly since before. He then adds that this is their chance to take revenge on him. Still anxious, Minori hesitates, prompting Makoto to remind her of his greatest advantage: he cannot die. She then urges him to be careful, warning him that Shikara is nothing like Taro. He is on a completely different level. Before he leaves, Minori casts an enhancement spell to further strengthen him. As soon as she finishes, Makoto swiftly moves toward Shikara. Upon reaching the gate, he hides behind a large tree to avoid being seen, but he suddenly notices that his vision has become much sharper. He spots Shikara stepping through the entrance of the poison swamp and realizes he is now very close, meaning he can escape easily if needed. Makoto continues to observe, hoping Shikara will venture deeper into the swamp, away from the entrance. But just then, he spots a boar nearby and considers incorporating it into his plan. Next, we see Makoto cutting his finger with a knife, using his blood as part of his strategy. He approaches the boar and presses his bleeding finger against its body. At this point, we understand that he is using a hypnosis ability, one that allows him to induce short-term hallucinations in his target by absorbing a small part of its body. He successfully takes control of the boar, making it run forward, prompting several other boars to follow. Soon, a herd of boars rushes toward Shikara and his group. The warriors accompanying him appear startled, but Shikara scoffs at them, calling them trembling cowards. He then declares that these boars are nothing more than a warm-up. The fighters begin attacking and fending off the boars. However, Shikara criticizes their performance, deeming them far too weak and seeking a greater challenge. After a short while, they manage to eliminate the boars. At that moment, Shikara tells his men that they will move further inside. One of them requests a brief rest first, which enrages Shikara, who dismisses the idea as nonsense. The warrior attempts to explain that he is feeling fatigued, but suddenly he begins bleeding from his eyes and gasping for breath. Soon, they all realize that every fighter in Shikara's group is experiencing the same symptoms, an intense exhaustion overtaking them for no apparent reason. Shikara is shocked to see his men in such a state and demands to know what has happened to them. But at that moment, he catches a strange scent lingering in the air and instantly recognizes it as a deadly poison. However, he questions this, as the poison swamp boars do not emit such a scent even after death. While he tries to determine the source of the poison, Makoto approaches from behind. The moment Shikara senses him, he delivers a sudden and powerful strike, sending Makoto flying backward. He then catches sight of the mask covering Makoto's face and realizes that he is the mysterious figure from the rumors. At that moment, Makoto lunges at him with his knife. He lands a swift strike, stabbing the blade into Shikara's hand with incredible speed. However, he is caught off guard when Shikara grips his injured hand with his uninjured one. He then delivers a brutal punch to Makoto, but this attack also gives Makoto the chance to distance himself again. Makoto is surprised by Shikara's reaction. Rather than being angered, he comments on Makoto's attack with admiration, stating that the rumors about him are indeed true. He is a remarkably strong fighter. Despite Makoto's frustration and his relentless attacks, he finds Shikara smiling at him, expressing his genuine admiration. Makoto stands in shock at the way Shikara is handling both him and the situation. Shikara continues speaking, stating that he admires strong individuals, unlike the weak, whom he utterly despises. He then gestures toward his fallen comrades on the ground and remarks that they died simply because they were weak. He goes on to say that he can sense Makoto's immense strength, which is why he is offering him a chance to join him. He proposes that Makoto become part of the Byakuren Guild, enticing him with promises of wealth, honor, and even women. Shikara assures him that if he accepts, he will have everything he could ever desire. Then, he asks for Makoto's thoughts, emphasizing that this is an offer too good to refuse. But Makoto remains silent, not responding at all, still perplexed by Shikara's words and his manner of speaking. Shikara then steps forward, placing his foot atop the corpse of one of his recently deceased comrades, reiterating his belief. He loves the strong, but he despises the weak. He then kicks the body away, commenting that he once thought they were strong enough, but it turns out he was mistaken. The mere sight of them now irritates him. Makoto listens as Shikara continues, stating that had he known this about them earlier, he would have simply used them as punching bags. At that moment, memories of Shikara's past brutal torment resurface in Makoto's mind. Watching as Shikara keeps kicking his fallen comrades, he finally asks him why he enjoys tormenting the weak this way. Shikara responds casually, as if it is the most natural thing in the world, saying that it is fun and entertaining. Makoto, confused, presses him for clarification, to which Shikara replies that all weaklings behave the same way when he beats them. He then bursts into laughter, explaining that they all beg for mercy and plead with him to spare them. Mocking them further, he describes how their faces wrinkle in terror, their expressions filled with utter despair in those final moments, which only makes it all the more enjoyable for him. At that instant, after hearing all of this, Makoto's rage reaches its peak, and he lunges forward to attack, determined to take his revenge. However, Shikara effortlessly evades the strike and grabs Makoto's arm, commenting that it was a good attack. He agrees with him. Men should fight each other first. He then clarifies that he views this as a test of strength between them, and in return, he delivers a powerful punch to Makoto. But Makoto skillfully dodges the blow, seizing the opportunity to draw his knife and swiftly stab Shikara's arm. Shikara retreats quickly, but he then remarks that he had no intention of letting Makoto escape anyway, acknowledging that he is indeed strong. At that moment, Makoto realizes that Shikara was never going to let him go so easily, because he is, in essence, a monster. Suddenly, Shikara charges at Makoto once more, unleashing his crushing devastation strike. The impact is devastating, sending Makoto flying backward at tremendous speed, covering a great distance before crashing into a massive tree. As he sits against the tree, he reflects that this is the most powerful strike he has ever endured. Then, a thought crosses his mind. Perhaps Shikara was not even using his full strength when he attacked him and his sister back when they were imprisoned. Moments later, he sees Shikara approaching him and asking, astonished, how he managed to withstand such a blow. Shikara then tells him that he expected this, admitting that he had only used 30% of his full power. Makoto now realizes that this incredible strike, the strongest he has ever encountered, was not even close to Shikara's full potential. To make matters worse, when Shikara notices the knife still in Makoto's grasp, he extends his hand forward and tells him that he can use it however he pleases. He then adds that he will accept any attack Makoto throws at him, ready to prove who is truly stronger. Makoto quickly gets up and lunges forward, aiming a direct stab at Shikara's abdomen. However, the knife does not even leave a scratch on his body. Shikara sneers, remarking that Makoto must not have sharpened his knife, as a blade this dull and worn out couldn't possibly scratch him, no matter how much strength he used. He then adds that Makoto was unable to inflict even the slightest injury, which only proves the vast difference in power between them. He will never be able to defeat him. But Makoto shouts at him to be quiet and lunges forward, attempting to stab him multiple times, yet to no avail. Shikara then tells him that he is the first person to challenge him with such persistence, despite knowing how powerful he is. He then excitedly admits that his admiration for Makoto grows with every passing moment, before delivering a powerful kick to him. The impact sends Makoto flying into a pool of toxic sludge. Shikara sighs, feeling frustrated that he let his excitement get the better of him, especially when he sees Makoto sinking into the poison. He is now certain that he is dead. Turning away, he declares that it is over, and that he had expected more from him. But suddenly, he is taken aback as a knife buries itself into his shoulder while he is walking away. He quickly pulls it out, now feeling uneasy. There's no doubt that the blade has become poisoned after Makoto's plunge into the toxic swamp. What shocks him even more is the sight of Makoto rising again from the sludge. He mutters in disbelief. After breaking his body with such force, he is standing once more. His skin hasn't even corroded after being submerged in the poisonous swamp. At that moment, he exclaims in astonishment that Makoto is no ordinary human. Then, a sudden realization strikes him. Could it be that he is? This thought enrages him, and he roars in denial that it is impossible. He then charges at Makoto, launching a relentless barrage of attacks, but Makoto skillfully evades them, retreating backward. Frustrated by his inability to land a hit, Shikara slams the ground with immense force. The sheer power of his strike causes a massive explosion that shakes the entire area. As the dust settles, the surroundings are revealed to be utterly destroyed, while Shikara stands unscathed in the middle of the wreckage. However, he soon notices Makoto's mask lying on the ground, having fallen off due to the explosion. Shikara bursts into hysterical laughter before addressing Makoto, declaring that it has finally been confirmed. It really is him. He has finally found him. He continues speaking, looking at Makoto, who stands before him seething with rage, affirming that he has been searching for him all this time. Laughing once more, he expresses his disbelief that the masked man had been Makoto all along. Then, he clarifies that the reason Makoto has been able to withstand his attacks isn't due to raw strength, but because of his body's regeneration ability. His tone then shifts to one of anger, as he tells Makoto that he has been hunting him down all this time because he is responsible for Tero's death, and he has been dreaming of the day he would exact his revenge. He then declares that there is no longer any talk of Makoto joining him or becoming his ally, as he had previously suggested when they first met. His eyes burn with hatred and fury as he glares at Makoto before stating, with finality, that he will kill him. Yet Makoto remains standing, unwavering, unaffected by his words. He then asks if killing him is truly the only thing that will bring him satisfaction and peace. Challengingly, he tells Shikara that what he is about to do to him will go far beyond mere death. The two stand face to face, eyes locked in defiance, each certain that he will be the one to emerge victorious. Shikara then launches his attack, surging forward with intent to end Makoto completely. At that moment, Makoto remains unmoving, making incisions on his own hands. As he does this, Shikara reaches him, leaping high into the air before landing in front of him, shouting that he will not allow him to escape. Due to Shikara's sheer speed and power, the impact between them is devastating, resembling yet another explosion. However, when Shikara looks ahead, Makoto is no longer in the spot where he had stood. Instead, he sees him dashing toward him from a distance. Makoto then accelerates at incredible speed, leaping high into the air before diving toward Shikara, aiming a punch directly at his face with all his might. But to Shikara, the attack is barely worth noting. He laughs and asks if that is truly the best Makoto can do. Then, without hesitation, he counters with a devastating punch to Makoto's face, asserting that this is what a real strike looks like. After landing the powerful blow, he glares at Makoto and repeats with emphasis, This is what true strength feels like. Makoto is in a dire state, prompting Shikara to glance at him questioningly before asking why his body is trembling. He then bursts into laughter, affirming that Makoto is indeed shaking and that his fear must be deeply ingrained within him. Makoto attempts to move, but Shikara continues to mock him, stating that fear is not something that easily fades away. He then asks whether Makoto still remembers the terror he felt when he was being tortured in the interrogation chamber. At that moment, it becomes apparent that Makoto's severed hand is positioned behind Shikara, and Makoto has been fixated on its location the entire time. He then decides to move it, and as soon as he does, his hand begins crawling along the ground until it reaches behind Shikara and latches onto the hand he was about to strike Makoto with. Enraged, Shikara attempts to shake it off, exclaiming that he knew there had to be a trick behind this move. He then steps closer to Makoto, challenging him and asking if he truly believes he can defeat him with such a petty maneuver. With that, he lands a powerful kick to Makoto's stomach before laughing once more and stating that he has a question for him. He asks how he managed to grow this strong in such a short period. When Makoto does not respond, Shikara informs him that since he refuses to answer, he will continue beating him until he does. He then kicks him in the head before stepping on it, adding that since Makoto is here, his sister must not be far away either. At that moment, Makoto recalls all the torment his sister endured at Shikara's hands, while the latter continues speaking, stating that once he is done playing with him, he will go searching for her. The mention of his sister, combined with the painful memories flooding his mind, causes Makoto's rage to surge uncontrollably. However, Shikara shows no mercy and continues to strike him while he lies beneath his feet, then considers restraining him with something before he has the chance to reconstruct his body again. He begins scanning the area for something to bind him with, but when he looks back at Makoto, he finds that he is no longer there. At that instant, Makoto appears behind Shikara without him noticing, having completely rebuilt his body, and realizes that Makoto's body reconstruction ability has become significantly faster than during their previous encounter. As he processes the extent of Makoto's improvement, he is taken aback when Makoto vanishes before his eyes. The moment he comprehends what has happened, Makoto reappears at his side and lunges at him with full force, attempting to deliver a decisive strike. However, Shikara's physical strength far surpasses his own, allowing him to counter the attack and knock Makoto down with a brutal blow. He then tells him that while he has indeed become faster, his speed is meaningless against his overwhelming strength. He then charges at Makoto and severs both of his arms, taunting him by questioning whether his body reconstruction ability will fail him this time, and wondering how much longer he can keep up such a pathetic defense. Makoto is then seen lying on the ground, both arms missing. Shikara sneers at him, declaring that all he does is rebuild his body and defend himself mindlessly, admitting that he never expected him to be this foolish. But then, he notices Makoto sitting there with a smile, prompting him to ask in confusion what he finds so amusing. At that moment, Makoto surprises him and fuels his anger further by stating that he had been thinking the same thing. He is relieved to know that Shikara is nothing more than a fool lacking intelligence. At that moment, all the severed arms from Makoto's body are seen gathering around Shikara, and Makoto commands them to move. Shikara is caught off guard as the arms all attack him simultaneously, but he scoffs, asking if Makoto truly believes an attack like this could affect him. However, he soon realizes that the arms are striking him with tremendous force, and he is unable to shake them off. In shock, he cries out, questioning the source of this power, and how someone who was trembling before him moments ago has reached such strength now. Makoto responds, telling him that while fear is indeed carved into his being, it has grown until it transformed into pure hatred toward them. At that moment, Makoto is completely consumed by rage and hatred, granting him power beyond his usual limits. He lands a devastating blow on Shikara. As a result of this strike, Makoto manages to sever Shikara's arm, causing him to scream in pain and shock. Standing before him with unwavering confidence, Makoto declares that they are now engaged in a contest of strength. Overwhelmed by agony and fury, Shikara yells at Makoto, vowing to beat him until he is nothing more than a punching bag. Raising his voice, he warns Makoto not to get conceited and believe he has become something noteworthy. He then charges at him in a frenzy, determined to crush him and tear him into tiny pieces so that he will never be able to rebuild his body again. But at that moment, Makoto commands all of his severed arms to converge, fusing them together into an enormous limb. Using this colossal arm, he delivers a powerful strike to Shikara's remaining hand, eliciting another agonized scream. It soon becomes clear that his second hand has also been severed, prompting Makoto to ask him how he feels now and what it is like to have lost in this contest of strength. He continues, questioning whether he feels pain or hatred, before telling him that the fear they all endured while imprisoned and tortured will now be carved into his own body. The scene shifts to a new setting, where a week has passed since the battle. Haruto asks Sia about their preparations for the upcoming fight to eliminate the second Demon King. Sia responds that they are close to finishing their preparations and that they have been pushing themselves harder in memory of Taro. Suddenly, Haruto asks who Taro is, requesting a reminder. Sia is stunned by his words and asks how he could say such a thing. Haruto stands still for a moment, contemplating the name before repeating it, stating that he remembers. He then laughs and tells Sia that he was only joking. However, Sia warns him never to joke about such matters again, saying it is not funny, even as a prank. Haruto apologizes, and they continue on their way. Later, Sia mentions to Haruto that he has not seen Shikara in a while. Haruto replies that Shikara is likely out searching for the immortal brothers. He then adds that Shikara always considered them good punching bags, as he well knows. Sia agrees, affirming the truth of his words. Haruto reassures him not to worry, stating that Shikara will certainly find a way to reclaim the two of them. Sia acknowledges this possibility. However, he then expresses his belief that they were the cause of his suffering and declares that when they return, he will kill them. At that moment, a man comes running toward them, calling out to them. Sia asks him what happened to make him run like that. The man responds that a package has arrived for them, stressing with great emotion that it is no ordinary package. Growing more bewildered, Sia and Haruto quickly follow him to see its contents. When they arrive, Sia asks Aya what happened. She responds with a question of her own, surprised by his inquiry, before pointing to the box and telling them that this is what happened. As Sia looks inside, he finds Shikara's hands along with one of his eyes. Trembling, he gasps in shock, exclaiming that this tattoo. Everyone quickly realizes that the hands indeed belong to Shikara. Later, the three of them gather alone, still in complete shock, with the box containing Shikara's severed arms before them. Aya casts a magical spell to determine whether the arms are real or an illusion. When the spell concludes, she confirms that they are not fake. They truly belong to Shikara. This revelation ignites Sia's fury. Aya then remarks that given Shikara's known strength, it would be extremely difficult for anyone to defeat him, wondering who could have done this to him. Haruto responds that whoever did it did not merely cut off Shikara's arms, they deliberately sent them to them, which means they hold an immense grudge. He then adds that since Shikara was searching for the immortal brothers, they should consider the possibility that they were responsible. However, Sia rejects this idea, insisting that those two could never defeat Shikara. Haruto replies that he has had his doubts ever since they managed to take down Taro. He further explains that although Taro may have been the weakest fighter among their team, he was still stronger than most of their mid-level hunters. And yet, Taro was defeated, and now Shikara, one of the strongest warriors in the world, has also been eliminated. Both of them have become stronger than they were before. Sia objects, saying that even if this is true, it is impossible for them to have grown powerful enough to kill Shikara in such a short time. Haruto then asks him how their own team became so strong. Sia responds that they already know the reason. He then adds that they kept killing the sisters, which allowed their levels to keep increasing each time. At that moment, he realizes why Haruto asked him that question and expresses his disbelief, saying that it is impossible. Haruto continues, explaining that their levels increase when they defeat high-ranking opponents, because they gain additional experience points. He then asserts that they likely killed each other repeatedly, wanting to level up as fast as possible. Sia considers his words and recalls what happened to Taro and Shikara, realizing that this explanation actually makes sense. Haruto then elaborates further, explaining to Sia and Aya that the sisters kept raising their levels until they reached the point where they could seek revenge against them. Sia grows increasingly tense and refuses to believe it, prompting Aya to intervene in an attempt to calm them down. She expresses her sorrow over what happened to Shikara, but insists that they must focus on what to do next. She then moves behind Sia and tells him that she has cast a spell to soothe his mind so he can relax, beginning to activate the enchantment. Sia thanks her, then stands up and tells them he will go ahead with his decision before leaving the room. After his departure, Haruto apologizes to Aya and asks her to leave him alone for a while. Understanding his request, she leaves. Once she is gone, Haruto approaches the box and opens it, staring at Shikara's severed hand with disgust. He scoffs, wondering sarcastically if the sisters truly believe they can frighten them with something like this. He then lifts the box and remarks that sending such trash in an attempt to intimidate them is nothing but an illusion, before dumping its contents into the garbage. He admits that their ability to defeat Shikara is impressive, but he calls them fools. Then, he notices the eye that had been inside the box, now lying on the ground. Without hesitation, he crushes it underfoot. It is then revealed that this eye was not Shikara's, it was Makoto's, which he had been using to spy on the guild and observe their reactions. Makoto is seen standing on top of a building, watching the guild's base through his enchanted eye. However, he realizes that he must return to Minori, as he is worried about her. He also reflects on how sending the package was just a convenient excuse to come to the city and purchase supplies for them. Despite his immunity to poisons, the food in the swamp is hardly ideal. Afterward, he goes shopping while noting that his clothes have been enchanted. If they get torn or damaged, they repair themselves automatically. He also buys some beautiful dolls to give to Minori to cheer her up, especially since he has left her alone for so long. Makoto is seen moving through the city from rooftop to rooftop, avoiding detection by any hunters. However, while doing so, he notices a group of them on the streets below. He quickly realizes that they are chasing someone who appears to be a young girl, and he recognizes that this street falls under the control of the Byakuren Guild. He initially considers staying out of the matter, but as he watches, the hunters close in on the girl, about to capture her. As the hunters get even closer, they taunt her, saying she has nowhere left to run. Unable to ignore the situation any longer, Makoto suddenly drops down from above, declaring that he despises bullies. One of the hunters demands to know who he is, but Makoto does not respond. He simply launches an attack, knocking them to the ground. He then turns to the girl and tells her that there must be a reason why they are after her, so she should run while she has the chance. However, the girl does not respond or make any move to escape. Curious, he steps closer to see her face, and the moment he recognizes her, he asks in astonishment what she is doing here. The scene shifts again, returning to the toxic swamp, where Minori stands anxiously waiting for her brother, who is significantly late. When she finally sees him arriving at the swamp, relief overtakes her, but she notices he's carrying someone else on his back. Disturbed and fearful, she questions the identity of this person and what has happened. Makoto reassures her, urging her not to worry, then asks her to look closely at the face of the person he's carrying, causing Minori the same shock Makoto felt earlier. She discovers that the girl he's carrying is an exact replica of herself, leaving her stunned as she exclaims that this girl is none other than Minori herself. The narrative then shifts to introduce the third member of the Byakuren Guild, Saya. He emerges as the celebrated leader whom the White Lotus Guild admires, being ranked among the elite S-class warriors known for his exceptional swordsmanship. His handsome appearance and friendly demeanor have made him particularly popular among the city's women. Furthermore, Saya is widely recognized as the source of constant joy within the White Lotus Guild. However, only those closest to him are aware of his cruel and genuine nature. Secretly, Saya harbors twisted and sadistic desires, masking his corruption behind an affectionate and deceptive facade. As he particularly enjoyed tormenting young women, he repeatedly reminded Minori she was his favorite victim. Unlike the others, Minori did not die regardless of how severely he tortured and mutilated her. Therefore, he derived the greatest pleasure from repeatedly torturing and killing her, reveling in her screams, which he found uniquely thrilling. All of this unfolded before Makoto, who was tormented by watching his younger sister suffer, eventually questioning Saya about why he didn't torture him instead. Saya responded by striking Makoto's mouth with his sword to silence him, explaining that torturing men brought him no enjoyment. He clarified that his greatest pleasure was in tormenting and killing women, then resumed torturing Minori, demanding louder screams, while Makoto screamed helplessly in sorrow. The scene transitions again, now showing Saya joyfully humming as he strolls through the Byakuren Guild halls. He suddenly notices Haruto walking with Taro toward a restricted room in the guild, a place off-limits to others. Intrigued, Saya secretly follows to discover the contents of the room, just as Taro had intended to investigate. Haruto, sensing his presence, turns to confront him, reminding Saya that spying is inappropriate. Saya laughs it off, apologizes, and admits his curiosity was piqued after observing Taro enter the room. Haruto responds that he doesn't mind showing Saya the room's contents, explaining they're planning to discard them anyway, so he might as well see for himself. Upon entering, Saya is shocked to discover numerous large tubes containing human bodies. Taro explains these are cloned replicas of Minori's body, created at Haruto's request. Astonished, Saya learns from Haruto that mass-producing these clones could potentially enable efficient experience point gathering. Haruto further explains they successfully created these clones using White Lotus Guild resources and Taro's advanced technology, but the outcome wasn't as expected. The clone's regeneration ability proved incomplete, halting entirely after about 10 deaths, and worse, their deaths yielded no experience points. Taro elaborates on Haruto's words, noting that attempts to enhance the production process proved too difficult, so they concluded the experiment was no longer beneficial and decided to discard the clones. Saya asks if they plan to throw them away, and Taro confirms this, adding that the clones can still be used one final time. He emphasizes they'll utilize them fully before disposal, reinforcing that ultimately nothing compares to the original. At that moment, Saya asks Taro to hand over these clones if he's no longer interested in them. Taro agrees but clarifies they're worthless and incapable of benefiting him, as they lack both emotions and willpower. He adds they're nothing more than defective toys, blindly obeying orders without consciousness or feelings. Saya replies enthusiastically that this is precisely why they're ideal. Taro is puzzled by Saya's strange excitement over mere toys, but Saya tells him that he simply doesn't understand. Approaching one of the tubes, Saya remarks that he typically dislikes playing with toys, but this particular one interests him greatly. He can freely torture, kill, resurrect, or dispose of them as he pleases, thus fulfilling all his twisted desires. Saya continues, explaining that their lives, existence, and everything about them would now belong exclusively to him and under his complete control. Haruto then looks at him admiringly, commenting that Saya's obsession is extraordinary, and approvingly calls him the worst person he's ever known. The scene shifts back to Makoto, Minori, and the girl they found, now revealed as one of Minori's clones. Minori is deeply distressed, crying after hearing about the other clones. Makoto gently asks if she's alright, and she reassures and thanks him. He then asks clone number 10 about the other clones, wondering if they're currently under Saya's control. She responds that she isn't certain of their exact number, but knows at least 12 of them are horribly exploited by Saya. Makoto then explains to her that, according to what he's heard, the clones lack emotions or free will, yet she appears different, so he questions her about the reason for this difference. She replies that she doesn't know why either, but one day she saw Saya's picture by chance on the news, and a strange feeling arose inside her. It was at that moment she understood what she felt was hatred and disgust toward Saya, realizing she'd experienced human emotions. She adds that's why she escaped from Saya's mansion, then breaks down in tears, telling them she successfully fled, but many other girls like her remain imprisoned, pleading desperately for their help. Makoto begins thinking and tells Minori that they can use these clones to eliminate Saya, prompting Minori to ask him what he means by that. Makoto explains that Saya doesn't realize these clones possess emotions, so he isn't cautious around them, offering a chance to use them against him. Minori anxiously asks what will happen to the girls if Saya discovers their plan. Makoto bluntly replies they'll likely be killed, but then casually remarks they're merely clones. Outraged, Minori slaps him, reminding him that these girls never chose to exist. She collapses, crying, begging him not to exploit them and leave them to die. She embraces number 10, declaring these clones were made from her own cells, making them her younger sisters. She then asks Makoto if he'd abandon his sisters if they begged for his help. Makoto argues that these clones could help them infiltrate Saya's mansion, providing a rare chance for revenge. But Minori insists, sternly stating that sacrificing others for revenge would make him no different from those monsters. Makoto is shaken by his sister's words and assures her that's not what he intended. Minori, standing beside number 10, firmly says they'll rescue the girls. And as for the cruel man who harmed her sisters, she adds with fierce determination that they'll kill him, declaring she'll finish him off herself. Makoto finally agrees, promising they'll save the girls together. He apologizes to clone number 10 for scaring her, and reassures her they'll all be safe now, and they'll rescue everyone together. Makoto and Minori then begin their mission to rescue the clones and end Saya's terror for good. The scene returns to Saya's mansion, depicted as a grand palace, where Saya angrily whips Minori's clones, demanding to know how a clone without will or consciousness could escape so easily. He angrily questions why none of them stopped her escape, and what they're even doing inside his mansion. Finally, he orders the clones to leave immediately, and return only after they've recaptured the runaway clone, prompting them to obediently head out to fulfill his orders. We move to another scene on the city streets, where the clones sent to find the runaway successfully locate her. After numerous attempts to evade them, running through the crowded streets, the clones eventually corner and trap her. Once captured, one clone informs the others that they've successfully caught her and are returning to Saya's mansion immediately. Meanwhile, Makoto and Minori are seen observing from a rooftop nearby, but it quickly becomes clear that the girl with Makoto on the rooftop is actually clone number 10, whom Makoto reassures that this was expected, as Saya had sent the clones to find her. Thus, we understand that the captured girl is the real Minori. Clone number 10 anxiously asks Makoto if his sister will be alright. Makoto reassures her, confidently stating he knows his sister well, and she will be fine. He adds that Minori isn't easily defeated, then urges Clone 10 that they must quickly follow the others. They immediately depart together. Shortly after, Makoto and Clone 10 arrive at Saya's residence. Makoto remarks that he never imagined Saya's home would be so enormous, resembling a massive palace. Clone 10 explains that her job, along with the other clones, is to serve Saya in this place. We briefly flash back to the moment when Makoto and Minori decided on their plan. Minori is seen drawing Clone 10's mark on her face. Makoto enters, handing Minori something in a bag. When she asks what's inside, he reveals it's his ear. Minori appears confused, but Makoto clarifies he'll use his body manipulation ability, as he did previously with his hands. So by carrying his ear with her to the mansion, he'll be able to hear everything happening inside and intervene immediately if she's in danger. Inside Saya's palace, the clones arrive with Minori, whom they believe to be Clone 10. Saya angrily confronts her, demanding how she dared to defy him. He furiously asks why she escaped from the mansion. Minori pretends to be Clone 10 and apologizes, claiming she noticed intruders outside and went after them. She tells him she already handled the situation, but Saya shouts at her, warning that if she repeats such behavior without permission, she'll be immediately disposed of. Saya senses something strange but receives a sudden call from Haruto, prompting him to leave the girls briefly, instructing them to finish their assigned tasks by the time he's done talking. After Saya leaves, Minori stands up and proceeds with another clone to carry out their duties. Throughout this time, Makoto listens carefully to everything, though he's confused by Saya's remark about disposing of any clone who disobeys. Minori then reaches a room filled with numerous clone corpses stacked on top of each other. Meanwhile, other clones are cleaning and removing the bodies of their companions disposed of by Saya. Horrified and distressed by the brutal scene, Minori urgently tells the clone beside her they must escape immediately before Saya returns. The clone innocently asks why they'd need to flee, reminding her their duty and role is to serve Master Saya. Minori angrily addresses all the clones, asking if they're aware of what's truly happening to them. The clones reply simply that they're only disposing of corpses and ask if they're doing anything wrong. Minori's anger intensifies, passionately demanding whether they truly fail to realize how utterly wrong their situation is, insisting it's impossible they're happy here. The clones inquire about the meaning of happiness she's referring to. One clone coldly tells Minori they're merely servants and slaves to Master Saya. She continues, stating they don't need wills or personalities. They exist only to obey orders, offer themselves, and accept punishment as required. The clone concludes by declaring that their entire existence belongs to Saya, who has every right to use them however he pleases, since they're nothing more than mere objects. Meanwhile, Makoto listened intently to everything happening inside the palace, feeling intense anger and frustration. Minori continued desperately trying to convince the clones that their situation was utterly wrong, but they persisted in claiming it was right, prompting Minori to scream, declaring everything happening was completely unjust. She then rushed toward one clone, tightly embracing her, stating she knew herself better than anyone else, and affirmed she understood very well the pain and torment they'd endured, certain that they couldn't possibly bear such suffering. The clone demanded Minori to release her, but Minori held on even tighter, loudly informing the other clones that their claims about lacking personality or free will were lies, and that their only issue was being unable to express their true feelings and desires. She then promised they'd all be rescued, but the clone replied she couldn't understand anything Minori was saying. Suddenly, Saya entered the room, harshly asking Minori who permitted her to speak without his permission. All the clones immediately bowed apologetically, except Minori, who defiantly stood without apologizing or bowing. Furious, Saya slapped her, accusing her of rebellion once again and labeling her as defective, needing immediate disposal. At that moment, the intense pain triggered Minori's traumatic memories of past torture inflicted by Saya inside his dungeon. Overwhelmed by these agonizing recollections and the slap she'd received, Minori forgot her role as a clone, glaring at Saya with anger and defiance. Provoked by her defiant gaze, Saya drew his sword to kill her, but another clone suddenly pleaded for him to stop and spare Minori. Enraged even more, Saya turned to strike that clone, reprimanding her for daring to give him orders. Then, screaming at all of them, he declared them useless, having grown tired of them, promising to kill them all. As Saya attacked the clone, Minori swiftly leaped to protect her, taking the blow instead. Saya was stunned by a clone sacrificing herself for another, knowing clones supposedly lacked emotions or free will. At that instant, Minori hurled a small hidden arrow at him, which he effortlessly caught. Saya attacked again, confidently declaring she must be the real Minori, eagerly asking if she was indeed Makoto's sister, clearly pleased by the discovery. At the same time, Makoto, overhearing everything, realized Minori's cover had been blown, and urgently informed clone number 10 of the situation. He quickly jumped over the palace walls, racing at full speed to save Minori from Saya before she was harmed. The moment Makoto entered the palace, alarms echoed throughout, alerting Saya, who mockingly asked Minori if her brother had come to rescue her. Laughing dismissively, Saya assured her it didn't matter, as Makoto would accomplish nothing anyway. Weakly, Minori asked him what he meant by that. Saya clarified that the mansion was full of clones, all exceptionally trained fighters. Leaning closer, Saya told her the clones resembled Makoto's sister, sarcastically remarking that he'd now see how long Makoto could survive against them. Indeed, Makoto was soon fighting fiercely against numerous clones attacking him with various weapons. Despite repeated attempts to evade and avoid harming them, Makoto eventually suffered a severe injury when one clone struck his shoulder with a large axe, severing his hand. At that moment, clone number 10 swiftly intervened, tackling one clone and knocking her down. She stood protectively in front of Makoto, prompting another clone to ask what she was doing. Clone 10 defiantly responded that Makoto was her older brother. However, the clones surrounded them, coldly stating it didn't matter since Master Saya ordered the elimination of all intruders. She emphasized their familial connection changed nothing, and defending Makoto marked Clone 10 as an enemy who must also be eliminated. Shocked by their reaction, Clone 10 tried to defend Makoto again, but he stopped her from speaking. Makoto then declared as her older brother, he must handle this himself, taking out his mask and placing it on, preparing to face the clones head-on. We return to Minori, who was being violently beaten and tortured by Saya, who appeared thoroughly delighted by her suffering. He dragged her by her hair, laughing loudly and mockingly proclaiming that this was the true difference between toys without emotions and the real thing. Then he forcefully threw her against the wall, causing her to collapse on the ground, screaming hysterically that she and her brother were responsible for Tero's death and for the loss of the power they had once gained. He angrily revealed how miserable the past few days had been because of them, then demanded to know why she'd returned after successfully escaping. Approaching her again, he harshly grabbed her arm, sarcastically remarking it was impossible she'd come back simply to become his pet once more. But Minori angrily shouted back that he was someone who had brutally tortured her and many other girls, pulling out another hidden weapon, asserting that she'd never forgive him. Saya mockingly responded, realizing she'd come seeking revenge against the man who previously tortured her. He then seized one of the clones by the hair, telling Minori he didn't know where she heard such nonsense, but she'd strayed from the correct path to rescue these worthless dolls, immediately slicing off the clone's head in front of her. Saya coldly told Minori he knew exactly how cruel this act was to her, causing Minori to scream in anguish and grief over the clone he'd mercilessly killed. Minori quickly stood, launching an attack on Saya, but he effortlessly dodged, mockingly asking if she genuinely believed she could harm an expert warrior like him with her weak abilities. Saya then swiftly severed Minori's arms with his sword, kicking her violently backward, telling her he'd teach her a valuable lesson. He then informed her that these dolls weren't alive in the first place, striking down another clone and killing it, emphasizing he alone could decide whether to play with or destroy them. However, Minori crawled desperately to embrace the fallen clone, looking up at Saya with fierce defiance, prompting him to remark he'd never expected her to stare at him with such bold rebellion. Saya charged at her again, declaring he'd transform her defiant gaze into despair and submission, slicing off the hand she used to shield the clone. But at that moment, Minori began activating her strength enhancement magic. Before Saya could strike another clone, Minori commanded him sharply to stop moving, but he ignored her demand, turning his sword toward another clone, asking sarcastically if she truly understood her situation. Without hesitation, Saya killed the clone before him, reminding Minori coldly that these things she so desperately wanted to save were merely worthless dolls. He mockingly questioned her persistent yet futile efforts to save them, stating she should have politely asked him instead. He then demanded Minori to kneel before him, but she refused, prompting him to mockingly ask if she truly didn't want to save the clones. Lifting the corpse of the dead clone on his sword, he repeated his demand, ordering her to kneel and apologize if she wished to spare them. When Minori refused again, Saya threw several small knives into another clone's body, warning Minori that her stubbornness would lead to even greater suffering for the remaining clones. Minori, now forced into submission, kneeled before him, begging Saya to stop torturing the girls, insisting he'd done enough harm already. Saya dropped the clone, pointing his sword directly at Minori, reminding her the clones were merely his toys, but hinted he might reconsider if Minori took their place. Suddenly bringing his sword close to her face, he ordered her to lick it, and when Minori hesitated, unable to comply immediately, he told her she had no right to refuse. Saya then brutally stabbed her arm with his sword, stating that the only words she was allowed to utter in his presence were "yes" and "at your service." Minori reluctantly obeyed, extending her tongue toward the blade, but Saya suddenly moved his sword swiftly, slicing off her tongue. Minori writhed in agonizing pain as Saya laughed insanely at her suffering, then grotesquely picked up her severed tongue from the ground and consumed it like an animal in front of her eyes. Afterward, his expression twisted with extreme pleasure and satisfaction, clearly savoring the taste entirely. At that moment, Minori, witnessing Saya's sickening enjoyment of his cruelty, tried to slowly move away from him, but he quickly grabbed her clothing roughly, telling her he'd never allow her to escape again. Seeing the terror and fear on her face brought him immense satisfaction. He remarked that this exact expression was what he desired, and that he wanted to see even more of it. He then violently tore the clothing of clone number 10 from Minori's body, laughing hysterically as he told her he longed to see even greater fear reflected in her eyes. Continuing to laugh uncontrollably, Saya declared she would stay here to serve him, forever under his control, fulfilling all his twisted desires. However, in that very moment, as Saya was caught up in his insane laughter, Makoto suddenly appeared and delivered a powerful punch directly to Saya's face. Makoto continued attacking fiercely, striking blow after blow until Saya fell to the ground. He quickly rushed over to Minori, handing her another set of clone number 10's clothing, apologizing for being late. Minori reassured him, stating confidently she always knew he'd come to save her. Meanwhile, Saya rose again furiously from the floor, angrily cursing Makoto and demanding to know what he'd done to all the clones in the mansion. Mockingly, Saya told Makoto it was impossible he'd killed them all, knowing they resembled his sister, but Makoto replied firmly that he hadn't killed any of them, just rendered them temporarily immobile. Saya laughed at Makoto's response, calling him boring and declaring that had he been in Makoto's place, he'd have made it far more exciting. Saya then threatened to capture Makoto, imprison him, and assault Minori repeatedly in front of his eyes. Enraged, Makoto told Saya he had a better idea. He'd cut him into a million pieces. He launched himself furiously at Saya, whose surprise at Makoto's strength forced him to admit he finally understood how Makoto managed to defeat all the clones. Makoto then delivered a powerful kick, knocking Saya back, but Saya quickly recovered, seizing his sword and preparing for combat. Activating his lightning speed, Saya swiftly moved toward Makoto, launching his blade with a strike known as the Divine Thunder. Makoto was stunned by Saya's incredible speed and strength, and the devastating attack succeeded in severing Makoto's hand, causing Saya to feel victorious. However, Saya was immediately caught off guard when Makoto's severed hand suddenly flew toward him, delivering a devastatingly powerful punch. The immense force of Makoto's blow sent Saya crashing violently into the wall behind him, shattering it. Saya quickly escaped through the newly created hole in the wall, with Makoto chasing after him, determined to finish him off for good. However, Saya ordered the clones to surround and shield him with their bodies, prompting Makoto to mockingly ask if he was now hiding behind the same girls he'd mercilessly tortured, calling him truly pathetic. Saya snapped back that the clones were merely his toys to use as he pleased, but Makoto cut him off, declaring the time for talking was over. Saya ordered the clones to capture Makoto, and they immediately began gathering around him. Makoto, hesitant to harm them because they all resembled his sister Minori, struggled to defend himself. Minori then exited the room as well, anxiously calling out to Makoto, but the clones surrounded her too. Instead of letting her through, the clones began violently attacking her, overwhelming her until she could no longer resist. Seeing his sister being brutally assaulted, Makoto desperately tried reaching her, but the clones held him firmly, restraining him. Fighting with all his strength, Makoto finally managed to stand again, moving determinedly toward Minori. Despite the clones' relentless attempts to stop him, he finally reached her, pleading desperately for them not to hurt his sister. At that moment, Saya approached from behind, cruelly driving his sword through Makoto's back, piercing straight into the body of the Minori clone directly in front of him. Laughing insanely, Saya mockingly asked Makoto, "Isn't this your beloved sister?" and sarcastically challenged him further, saying, "Come on, try to protect her now." Makoto looked toward his sister's clone, apologizing deeply for all the pain she'd endured because of him, but the clone calmly replied that no apology was necessary, since it was simply her duty. Makoto firmly told her this wasn't true. She was only following orders she hadn't chosen herself. The clone stared at Makoto, confused and unable to grasp what he was saying, while Makoto simultaneously directed an intense gaze full of anger and defiance towards Saya. Seeing this expression, Saya felt an unprecedented fear, quickly pulling his sword from Makoto's body and anxiously asking what this look meant. Saya then chased Makoto, repeatedly trying to strike him, but Makoto skillfully evaded every attack. Frustrated, Saya threatened that if Makoto continued dodging, he would immediately kill the clone in front of him. When Saya swung his sword to strike the clone, Makoto swiftly jumped in front of her, taking the blow himself. Saya laughed hysterically, mocking Makoto for his lack of resistance and striking him again, threatening more severe torture of his sister if he resisted further. Minori screamed in pain and fear as she watched Saya brutally torture Makoto, still helplessly restrained by the other clones. Saya then unleashed a devastating move known as the Serpent Slash, mercilessly slicing Makoto's body multiple times, leaving him cut into several pieces. He placed his foot on Makoto's severed head, laughing insanely, and declared he'd stand there enjoying the sight of what he would soon do to Minori. Yet, as Saya stood victorious, stepping arrogantly on Makoto's head, Makoto's body unexpectedly began regenerating itself. Fully restored, Makoto swiftly knocked Saya's foot aside and rose back onto his feet. Saya, shocked at Makoto's rapid recovery, heard Makoto defiantly challenge him, asking, "What makes you think you've defeated us?" Saya sarcastically retorted that Makoto was surely doomed, merely pretending to be strong. Ignoring him, Makoto stood again, positioning himself protectively before the clones, who watched him in astonishment. Confused, one clone asked why Makoto persisted in protecting them. Smiling gently, Makoto replied, "Does a brother really need a reason to protect his sisters?" Makoto's words visibly affected the clones, causing them to exchange uncertain, thoughtful glances. Saya mockingly asked Makoto about these sisters he mentioned, adding they were nothing more than toys created by White Lotus technology. Saya insisted that no matter how hard Makoto tried to protect them, they'd always be slaves obedient to him alone. Saya then ordered the clones to kill Makoto, promising that the clone who succeeded would become his favorite. However, all the clones remained motionless, ignoring his order. Furious and outraged, Saya screamed at the clones that he alone had authority, and they had no right to disobey his commands. Yet the clones continued standing silently, unable to respond or decide what to do next. At that moment, clone number 10 appeared, addressing the other girls, telling them they should have clearly understood the situation by now. Saya flew into a rage upon seeing clone number 10 addressing the clones directly. Undeterred, number 10 continued, urging the clones to realize the truth after all the pain and suffering they'd experienced in this place. She emphasized that they must recognize who genuinely wanted to protect them, Makoto. She concluded by firmly stating they must understand who their true enemy was. Hearing this, the clones slowly turned their gazes towards Saya, expressions clearly shifting as they began understanding. As all the clones collectively stared at Saya, visible anxiety and fear overtook him, especially when the girls collectively asked him not to harm their brother. Afterwards, all the clones surrounded Saya, weapons aimed at him, leaving Makoto and Minori puzzled about what was happening. Moments later, the clones began speaking to each other, explaining they were genetic copies of the original Minori and thus identical, then revealed they'd started seeing glimpses of the real Minori's memories in their minds. Inside their minds, the clones saw scenes and images of everything Makoto had done to protect them, recalling his continuous sacrifices for their safety. The clones stood together, each beginning to speak about Makoto's bravery, sacrifices, and repeated willingness to risk his life for their sake. Makoto initially felt astonished, but quickly realized that his sister, Minori, was using her body manipulation ability, similar to how he'd once controlled his severed hand and ear. Through this skill, Minori managed to subconsciously share her memories and experiences with the clones, as they were created from her own cells and shared her genetic makeup. Saya, enraged by this turn of events, screamed at the clones, reminding them they were just his toys and must obey his commands. However, the clones refused, stating firmly they couldn't follow his orders this time. Even though they couldn't fully grasp their current emotions, they knew anyone who tried to hurt their brother was their enemy, no matter who he was. Saya's fury grew, and he threatened to tear them apart with his sword, but Makoto stepped forward defiantly, asking if Saya genuinely thought he'd allow him to do that. Makoto then attacked swiftly, knocking Saya's sword out of his grasp. As Saya reached to retrieve it, one clone pierced his hand with her spear before he could grab the weapon. Another clone immediately pinned his hands firmly to the ground, completely immobilizing him. Makoto stood over Saya, looking down and questioning aloud how he should kill him now. But Minori approached Makoto, reminding him of his earlier promise that he'd let her kill Saya herself. She explained that unless she personally ended his life, she would never find peace or satisfaction. Minori stepped closer, carrying a huge hammer. Saya begged desperately, screaming for her not to strike him in that specific spot. Yet Minori, filled with rage over the torture she'd endured, smashed him viciously precisely where he feared most. Saya cried out and wept in agony, but Minori continued striking him repeatedly, raising her hammer again, declaring she would keep hitting him until he could no longer scream. Suddenly, clone number 10 interrupted, requesting a moment to speak, reminding Minori that they too had suffered tremendously under Saya's cruelty. She emphasized that it wasn't just them, dozens of others had been tortured, suffered, and killed by Saya as well. Minori responded firmly, stating that this was precisely why she insisted Saya experience the same pain he'd inflicted upon everyone. But Clone 10 countered, clarifying she didn't merely want Saya to experience their pain, she wanted him to suffer far worse than anything he'd ever inflicted upon others. Makoto intervened, telling Clone 10 he understood her feelings, but the experiences they'd endured were already enough. The clones interrupted him, passionately recounting that they'd repeatedly been killed and humiliated, with another clone adding they'd lived through absolute hell. One clone then informed Makoto that, in the palace basement, a strange creature had been imprisoned inside a cell for a very long time. She explained this creature was constantly drugged using special biocorn techniques, making it uncontrollably violent and aggressive toward anything moving in front of it. Makoto asked whether this creature attacked even human males, to which the clone firmly replied that it did. She added that a hunter once challenged Saya, who responded by forcing the creature to brutally attack and assault him. Hearing this, Makoto turned to Minori for her opinion. She immediately agreed, expressing readiness to do whatever necessary to exact revenge on Saya. The two siblings, accompanied by the clone, then proceeded toward the creature's location. The scene shifted, showing Saya chained and locked inside a cell in the basement of his own palace. Makoto, Minori, clone number 10, and another clone stood outside the cell, calmly observing Saya as he screamed hysterically, pleading desperately to be released. We then see a special device used for opening and closing cells. Someone presses a button on the keyboard, announcing that the cell is now open. We realize immediately that the unlocked cell belongs to the strange creature previously described by the clone. Saya becomes terrified upon seeing that the creature's cell opens directly onto his own. He screams hysterically, begging them not to release this particular monster, desperately claiming he'd endure any form of torture except this. At that moment, we learn the creature's name is Emperor Orc, though it's a modified version. Makoto remarks that he's heard of the Emperor Orc before, recalling that just one of these creatures could mate with an entire population. The clone clarifies that normally this creature mates only with females of its own kind, but the Biocorn laboratories used advanced technology combined with special drugs to enable it to mate with anything, regardless of species. Unable to handle the scene unfolding before her, Minori turns away, prompting Makoto to instruct the clone to stop watching. Minori then asks the clone to lower the curtain slightly between them and the cell, but she still witnesses the deformed creature exacting its brutal revenge on Saya. Saya's torture and screams continue for a long time. Eventually, an exhausted Minori sits on the floor, while Makoto leans against the wall, worn out. Clone number 10 anxiously asks if they're both alright. Makoto assures her he's fine, but just extremely tired and needs some rest. Minori similarly confirms her need to rest briefly. The clone then prepares tea, and the three of them sit to rest for a while. Clone 10 expresses gratitude, thanking them sincerely for allowing the clones their brutal revenge against Saya. Makoto calmly responds that he'd intended to kill Saya eventually anyway. However, Clone 10 reminds him gently that he chose not to kill anyone, resulting in no deaths occurring since the battle began. She continues, saying she's unable to sufficiently express her gratitude for everything he's done for them, genuinely thankful from her heart. Makoto tells her no thanks are needed, then asks Clone 10 to accompany him to show him around the rest of the palace. He explains that they need to gather food and equipment, as well as collect information on Biocorn. Number 10 agrees and says she'll stay behind to watch the area, instructing clone number 3 to accompany Makoto. As they walk together, Makoto asks number 3 what the clones plan to do next, and she replies uncertainly that she doesn't know. She sadly adds they never chose to be created, and possibly no one in this world will accept them. Makoto firmly tells her that's not true. Even if the whole world rejects them, he and Minori would always accept them, regardless of their origin or future choices. He assures her they have every right to live however they wish. Number 3 feels great joy hearing these comforting words, happily agreeing with him. When they finally reach their destination, Number 3 happily opens the door, cheerfully telling Makoto she's determined to live her life as fully as possible. But suddenly, as she smiles hopefully at Makoto, he's horrified to see her head abruptly severed right before his eyes. Makoto is profoundly shocked by the suddenness of this tragic event, desperately calling her name, unable to comprehend what's happening. He's even more stunned upon seeing who's responsible for the attack, sorrowfully questioning their presence and motive for such cruelty. The attacker steps forward, revealed to be Haruto, who calmly remarks that it's been a long time since they last met. Makoto is then horrified to discover that Haruto has eliminated all the other clones inside the palace. Haruto coldly demands Makoto tell him Saya's location. Overwhelmed by grief, Makoto silently kneels beside Clone 3's body, unable to answer. Haruto approaches him, stating casually that it doesn't matter if he finds Saya or not. He adds that he'd wish to celebrate their reunion, but acknowledges the circumstances won't allow it now. He coldly declares he'll handle everything himself, then suddenly strikes Makoto with his sword. Moments later, we see Haruto has successfully severed both of Makoto's hands. Haruto stands mockingly in front of Makoto, taunting him by asking sarcastically if he's become conveniently helpless now. Makoto, consumed by anger, stood and charged fiercely toward Haruto, ready to attack. However, Haruto easily dodged his strike, remarking mockingly that Makoto was far too slow, even slower than he'd expected. Makoto desperately attacked from all angles, but Haruto's swift reflexes allowed him to evade effortlessly, preventing Makoto from landing a single blow. Haruto then taunted Makoto, saying his reckless attacks were utterly pointless. Demonstrating true power, Haruto delivered a single strike with his sword, instantly severing Makoto's arm and shattering part of the floor, stating calmly, "This is what a real attack looks like." He followed up with another powerful strike, destroying a nearby section of the palace just inches away from Makoto. Furious, Makoto called him a monster, but Haruto laughed, explaining that the term monster actually meant he was immortal. Looking at Makoto with provocative confidence, Haruto challenged him sarcastically to regenerate quickly. But Makoto was stunned to discover that his severed hand wouldn't regenerate this time, leaving him frozen in shock. Haruto laughed again, explaining that he'd imbued his sword with sacred magic, making it temporarily impossible for Makoto to regenerate any severed limbs. Upon hearing this, Makoto realized his severed hand was indeed not regenerating, leaving him overwhelmed by confusion and despair, unsure how to respond given Haruto's obvious strength and power. Believing he couldn't possibly defeat Haruto in his current state, Makoto's main concern shifted toward ensuring Minori's safe escape from this place. Determined to achieve this goal at any cost, Makoto then asked Haruto how he knew they were here. Haruto simply replied that he hadn't received Saya's regular report, so he'd come to investigate, discovering them by chance. Haruto laughed, saying his own luck was excellent, but Makoto's was clearly terrible. Haruto then explained that he hadn't asked the question casually. He wanted an answer. Staring coldly at Makoto and concluding this meant Minori must also be somewhere inside the palace, causing Makoto intense anxiety for his sister's safety. When Makoto remained silent, Haruto calmly told him not to worry. He had no intention of avenging his fallen comrades. In fact, Haruto revealed he was genuinely grateful to Makoto and Minori for eliminating them. As Makoto expressed shock, Haruto explained that their deaths had significantly increased Makoto and Minori's levels. Haruto then told Makoto coldly that since their levels had risen, killing Makoto now would elevate Haruto's own level dramatically. Makoto asked him if he'd lost his mind, to which Haruto calmly replied that he didn't know, and nobody else did either. Makoto, mustering his strength, charged once more. But at that exact moment, Haruto swiftly drew his sword, piercing Makoto's body. Haruto's level began to rise dramatically, and with great satisfaction, he stated that the incredible sensation he felt now was the greatest pleasure he'd ever experienced. Makoto resisted the pain, standing in front of Haruto and declaring he'd kill him. Haruto, laughing dismissively, replied coldly that this was impossible, activating holy world magic and brutally kicking Makoto away. Makoto fell to the ground, his body bleeding profusely, as Haruto contemptuously told him he was weak. Haruto continued, mockingly pointing out that in Makoto's current weakened state, he wouldn't even be able to touch him. Makoto now felt severely weakened, realizing his body was no longer able to regenerate or recover from his injuries. Haruto calmly explained to Makoto that he sought absolute power, indifferent to whether he acquired it from Makoto or Minori, as both would serve as fuel for that strength. Haruto offered Makoto a choice. If he obeyed and followed his commands, he'd spare Minori's life and leave her alone. But if Makoto resisted, Haruto knew exactly how to disable him completely and would take Minori away by force. At that moment, Makoto felt this was the only way he could save his sister, so he fearfully asked Haruto if he was serious and not deceiving him. Haruto coldly replied that it entirely depended on Makoto's obedience and good behavior. Determined to protect Minori at all costs, Makoto knelt down, desperately begging Haruto to take him and do whatever he wanted, as long as he spared Minori. Haruto laughed mockingly, calling Makoto pathetic and devoid of pride, but claimed he'd spare Minori just this once out of pity for his naive thinking. As Makoto finally felt hopeful that he'd successfully saved his sister, even if at the cost of his life, Haruto cruelly revealed he'd been lying, calling Makoto a fool. Haruto then coldly added that he would surely kill Minori as well, filling Makoto with overwhelming rage. Unable to act, Makoto could only scream furiously at Haruto, who swiftly kicked him away. At that very moment, several clones suddenly appeared, attacking Haruto from every direction. Minori also appeared alongside number 10, commanding the clones to protect their older brother, Makoto. Haruto mockingly remarked that there were clearly more clones, and Saya had taken good care of them. Minori moved quickly to check on Makoto, but he desperately shouted at the clones to stop, fearful for their safety, knowing they couldn't defeat Haruto. Makoto's fears became reality as Haruto began ruthlessly killing the clones one by one. Makoto pleaded in agony, begging Haruto to spare the girls, but to no avail. Clone number 10 admitted they stood no chance against Haruto, but she hoped to buy enough time for Makoto and Minori to escape. While Haruto fought the clones around him, he remained cautiously aware of Makoto, Minori, and number 10's actions. Suddenly, number 10 revealed a crystal radiating intensely powerful light, telling Makoto and Minori that they'd rescued the clones from their living hell, and now it was their turn to help them. Number 10 activated teleportation magic, instantly transporting Makoto and Minori far away. Haruto watched in astonishment, shocked by number 10's immense magical power, comparable even to the witch Aya. Approaching with his sword, Haruto found number 10 collapsed, drained of energy beside the magical crystal, posing a significant problem for him. Haruto then turned to the remaining clones, defiantly challenging them all to attack him at once. However, one clone stepped forward, tearing part of her clothes and warning Haruto that he must first witness their true hidden abilities. Haruto suddenly recalled Taro's words, realizing Taro intended to use these clones and discard them afterward, causing Haruto to wonder anxiously if this referred to their high-density soul energy. Confused, Haruto struggled to identify what he was seeing beneath the clones' clothes, suspecting it might be a biological bomb utilizing magical energy. Still uncertain, he overheard the clones expressing gratitude toward the original Minori and their older brother, Makoto. Suddenly, the glowing crystal inside the clone's body exploded violently, triggering a massive blast throughout Saya's palace, with Haruto still inside alongside the remaining clones. The scene then shifted to the witch Aya, a member of Byacorn Guild. She was renowned as the most beautiful member of the White Lotus Guild. It was also widely known that any man who saw her would instantly fall in love, captivated by her enchanting beauty and gentle personality. Only those who got close to her truly understood her reality. It is known that for the past 6 months, she had also been visiting the laboratory site where they carried out their experiments that amounted to sheer atrocities. At that time, she observed that the project they were working on had reached 50% completion, and she was thrilled, considering it a major advancement. Later, it becomes clear that she had also been conducting her own experiments on Makoto and Minori. She continues speaking, stating that they still need to accelerate their progress slightly. At that moment, we see that beneath Makoto and Minori, inside that glass cage, there is a massive fan operating like a shredding machine. We come to realize that she was actually using it to grind their bodies, not merely to cut or kill them. She watched the process unfold while the siblings screamed in agony, yet she remained utterly delighted, feeling no remorse whatsoever. A drainage pipe extended from the shredder, carrying their filtered blood. Aya remarked that this process did not contribute to level advancement, yet she continued to repeat it over and over, aiming for the highest possible percentage. She added that she was not particularly concerned, even if the procedure failed to enhance her level. Then, she looked at Makoto and Minori, who remained trapped before her, affirming that what truly mattered to her was gaining access to their blood. She then turned to Minori, who was drowning in deep sorrow and pain, and commented that she had expected immortals to resemble zombies more closely. However, she had never imagined their skin would be as soft and flawless as Minori's. She further stated that the pain they experienced each time she killed them was insignificant, as their skin always returned to its original state, like that of a newborn baby. She continued, saying that this was what every woman desired, as beauty and youth attracted both men and wealth effortlessly. Staring at Minori with intense resentment, she noted that Minori had possessed all of this since birth without making any effort, openly admitting that she envied and despised her for it. After that, she approached the faucet from which the extracted blood of Makoto and Minori flowed. She remarked that it was no longer of any use, then filled a glass with the blood and drank it, asserting that as long as she could obtain their blood, she would no longer have to worry about the matter. After drinking, she declared that by continuing this, she would maintain her youthful and radiant skin for the rest of her life. Then, expressing sheer joy, she affirmed that she wanted more and more of their blood, claiming it was the best thing that had ever happened to her. At that moment, it was revealed that Haruto had been with her in the lab, equally pleased. We return to the present time, after the massive explosion that occurred in Saya's luxurious mansion. However, we see Haruto standing in the middle of the scene, contemplating the situation and wondering why he could not sense their presence. Had they managed to escape? Just then, his communication device rang, and upon answering, he discovered that the caller was Aya. As soon as Haruto greeted her, she interrupted, stating that pleasantries were unnecessary. She only wanted to know whether he had managed to capture the siblings or not. He informed her that they had killed Saya, but had once again managed to escape. She shouted at him in fury, making it clear that she did not care about Saya or his fate. What truly mattered was that he found the siblings quickly, as she needed their blood. Haruto then asked why she was in such a rush, pointing out that she already had a considerable supply of their previously extracted blood. However, she responded that the blood was only effective when fresh, and at the current rate, her beauty and youth were at risk. But Haruto cut her off, remarking that she was being excessively loud and causing an annoying commotion, adding that he was uninterested in everything she was saying. This enraged Aya further, and she lashed out, accusing him of being responsible for everything that had gone wrong. She called him useless, and ordered him to go find them immediately, no matter what it took. Haruto, however, was irritated by her commanding tone. He questioned when she had become important enough to give him orders. He then continued, telling her that if she was so desperate for their blood, she should go after them herself. He had more significant matters to attend to, and it would be better if they went their separate ways. With that, he ended the call. Then, adding further insult, he smirked mockingly, and told her that if she kept getting this worked up and shouting so much, it would only lead to more wrinkles on her face. And with that, he disconnected the call. We shift to another scene, where we see Makoto and Minori. Minori was trying to wake her brother and ensure he was all right. When Makoto regained consciousness, he asked where they were, and she told him that they had teleported to one of the labyrinth's passageways, near the gate. When Makoto asked what had happened to the other girls, Minori's expression grew sorrowful, and she struggled to find the right words to respond. Makoto felt deep sadness for them, and grew angry at himself for failing to save them. He recalled what had happened, and how Haruto had defeated him. His mind replayed the promises he had made to them, that he would rescue them, but in the end, he had failed to keep his word. Minori moved closer to him and embraced him, trying to console him. She told him that he had done everything he could to save them, and that they had all known that. Yet Makoto still felt immense guilt, recalling what he had previously said about using them to kill Saya. He admitted to Minori that he had wanted to atone for that sin by saving them. Minori reassured him, telling him that it was over now, and comforting him by saying that his feelings had been clear to the girls, which was why they had stood by their side and helped them until the very end. She continued speaking, mentioning that the bond they all shared was one of, but she was unable to complete her sentence, overcome with emotion, and broke into tears. Makoto too broke down, saying that he was weak and that he wanted to become stronger. Minori told him she felt the same, and that they had to grow stronger together. At that moment, they made a decision to walk this path together, and began moving back to their place. As they walked, Minori told Makoto that he had been unconscious for an entire day, and that the White Lotus Guild had issued a new statement regarding them. Makoto asked if the statement was about Saya's death, but Minori told him it was not just that. The guild had increased the bounty on them tenfold, making it 5 billion for each of them. When Makoto saw the news, he realized that the bounty had become too large and tempting, ensuring that everyone would now be after them. He then told Minori that their location could be easily exposed if someone had tracked their teleportation, and they needed to leave the labyrinth swamp immediately and head somewhere else as quickly as possible. Without hesitation, they started moving out of their current location, which resembled a cave. Then, Minori noticed a light in one direction and pointed toward it, telling Makoto that it had to be the exit. At that moment, however, Makoto noticed something moving in front of the opening Minori had pointed to, and quickly told her to stop. They cautiously approached to investigate, only to discover, to their shock, that the figure moving in front of the exit was a massive dragon. Both of them were instantly overwhelmed with fear at the sight of the terrifying creature. But what made matters worse was that as soon as the dragon saw them, it unleashed a massive blast of fire in their direction. Makoto immediately grabbed his sister's hand, and they sprinted away as fast as they could. Minori suggested returning to the labyrinth, but he refused, saying it was better for them to head outside and escape completely. However, the dragon blocked their path, and as soon as they stepped outside, they were met with waves of raging flames. Yet, they managed to escape just before the dragon obliterated the area. After getting out of its sight, they were left in shock, wondering why such a beast was outside the labyrinth. But suddenly, the dragon discovered their location again. Makoto told his sister that they needed to keep running, as there was no possible way they could survive against a dragon of that size and strength. They resumed their desperate escape, with the dragon's fiery breath pursuing them. As they fled, they spotted a place with towering buildings. Minori asked if it was a city in the middle of the forest they were running through, and Makoto told her he had heard that dragons did not attack inhabited areas. But in the very next moment, they were horrified to see the dragon setting the entire city ablaze. Minori realized that the assumption had been wrong, but she still questioned what could be driving the dragon to do this. Makoto then explained that the flames produced by this dragon reached temperatures exceeding 3,000 degrees, capable of melting almost anything. In fact, they were even stronger than artillery fire. He continued, saying that the only way to defeat such a dragon was if a large number of high-ranking guilds joined forces to fight against it. Minori, overwhelmed by fear, clung to her brother and asked how they could possibly escape from this monster. However, Makoto's response took her by surprise. He told her they wouldn't run away, but instead, they would face it together. Minori, filled with worry, asked him what he meant, fearing that he was suggesting. Makoto then reached the dragon, which was preparing to unleash its fiery breath once again. He latched onto a nearby tree, then activated his strength-enhancing skill, propelling himself rapidly from one point to another, making it impossible for the dragon to strike him. At that moment, Makoto declared that he was not the only one capable of fighting while airborne. Thinking about the dragon as a living creature, Makoto reasoned that its most vulnerable point must be its head. With that in mind, he leaped from the tree and lunged at it. However, despite the force of his attack, he was unable to even scratch the dragon's head, shocking him with its incredible toughness. Meanwhile, Minori considered that the weak point might be between the scales covering the dragon's body, so she attempted to strike that area with her weapon. However, she was stunned to see her weapon shatter the moment it made contact with the dragon's body. At that instant, the massive beast turned toward her, preparing to attack. Makoto immediately noticed the danger, and without hesitation, he jumped from the top of the tree, placing himself directly in front of the dragon at the exact moment it unleashed its fire toward Minori, shielding her with his own body. Minori watched in horror as her brother was engulfed in the massive flames, frozen in shock before screaming his name. Overcome with rage, she hurled curses at the dragon and charged toward it, determined to take revenge. However, the dragon suddenly turned its gaze toward her, and the moment its eyes locked onto her, it unleashed an immensely powerful flame known as Black Fire, with the intent to kill her. Minori attempted to defend herself using her magic. only to be horrified when she saw the flames consume even her spells. She realized with terror that the black fire was capable of burning even magical energy itself. Despite the searing pain from her burning hand, she remembered the girls whose lives had ended because of her and Makoto's weakness. Understanding that they had to become stronger, she made a harsh decision. She endured the agony and swiftly severed her own burning hand. She then stood her ground against the dragon, raising her weapon, fully committed to executing the plan she had agreed upon with Makoto. At that moment, Makoto reappeared, having reconstructed his body. Minori looked at him with relief, reassured that he had returned. As for Makoto, he had regained his fighting spirit, fully determined to defeat the dragon. He noted that, just as he expected, his bones had been eroded by the heat. Steeling himself, he made a decisive move and severed his own arm, enduring excruciating pain, but refusing to back down, determined to bring down the dragon no matter the cost. As Makoto cut off his arms, the dragon had already closed in on them. Without hesitation, he launched his severed hands toward it. One of his hands struck the dragon's body directly, while the other hit its wing, causing the beast immense pain and rendering it incapable of flight. Seizing the moment, Makoto called out to Minori, urging her to act immediately. She rushed toward the now weakened dragon, preparing to unleash her magic against it, knowing they needed the most powerful spell possible to take it down. Minori gathered all her energy and directed the black fire toward the dragon. For the first time, the beast let out a scream of pain, wounded by both Makoto's attack and the magic she had cast upon it. At that moment, Makoto moved in closer and commanded his severed hands to merge once more, preparing to deliver the finishing blow. However, he quickly realized that sheer force alone would not be enough to penetrate the dragon's scales. Thus, he compressed the cells in his hands, reshaping them into the form of a spear. After successfully executing his plan, Makoto focused all his strength on striking a single point on the dragon's head repeatedly until he finally managed to take it down. However, when he saw that the dragon was truly dead, he couldn't believe for a moment that he and his sister had actually achieved this victory and defeated such a colossal beast. Soon after, their levels began to rise at an astonishing rate. The two then sat down to rest after everything they had been through recently. Makoto told Minori that they had finally done it, to which Minori agreed, though she was utterly exhausted. At that moment, Makoto asked her about the strength she had displayed while using magic in their battle against the dragon. She explained that being exposed to the dragon's flames had significantly enhanced her abilities. Makoto laughed, commenting that it was an incredible and impressive ability. Minori chuckled as well, momentarily forgetting her exhaustion. But after a few moments, they both stood up and looked at the destruction the dragon had left behind, unable to comprehend why it had appeared in this place, especially since when Makoto had passed through here before, there had been nothing unusual. They then returned to where the dragon had fallen, and Makoto remarked that it had been under someone else's control, having noticed a faint pink glow in its eyes. At that moment, they both recalled how Aya had manipulated Minori's mind using hypnosis while they were imprisoned in the cell. Minori commented that for such a powerful beast to be under hypnosis, there was only one person capable of doing that, the ruthless Aya. Suddenly, Makoto and Minori noticed large flocks of birds soaring through the sky, rapidly approaching them. As they got closer, the siblings were shocked to see that these were no ordinary birds, but a group of ferocious raptors, along with a large number of dragons. What was even more bizarre was that they spotted two individuals riding on the back of one of the flying dragons, as if they were leading the creatures toward Makoto and Minori's location. The dragons reached their position, and the figures riding them descended to the ground, standing directly before them. Makoto observed them, unable to determine their intentions, and asked Minori if it was possible that they too were under someone's control. She replied that she suspected as much. Without warning, the individuals immediately attacked Minori, swinging a sword at her. However, she managed to block the attack with the dagger she carried. One of them then attempted a similar strike at Makoto, but he dodged at the last moment. During the skirmish, the two were taken aback when another dragon unleashed a powerful blast of fire upon the area, so intense that even the nearby waters began to boil and evaporate from the extreme heat. At that moment, Makoto realized that the first dragon had merely been the beginning of an assault against them. Minori told him that their location had undoubtedly been exposed now, and he agreed. Just then, a group of hunters surrounded them, accompanied by the raptors and dragons. Makoto told his sister that he would handle the dragon, asking her to take care of the hunters. However, Minori hesitated, pointing out that these people were under hypnosis. Makoto quickly realized that this situation was stirring painful memories for his sister, so he apologized for nearly putting her in this position. He then told her to stay back, assuring her that he would handle it alone. As promised, Minori remained behind while Makoto stepped forward on his own. However, at that moment, Minori realized that her brother was carrying an enormous burden, taking all the responsibility upon himself. She recalled everything that had happened in Saya's mansion. Determined, she grabbed his hand before he could move further, and told him that she had always relied on him because of his kindness and strength, but now she understood that this was not the right way to approach things. She then stood in front of him and declared that she would no longer allow him to bear all of this alone. This battle was their revenge. Together, Makoto felt happy that his sister had overcome her fears and painful memories, and together, they charged forward to face the hunters. Minori began using her magic, which had become significantly stronger after her battle with the dragon. She continued her attacks on the hunters, giving Makoto the chance to move freely without interference, allowing him to face the dragon. However, this time, Makoto discovered that the dragon before him did not breathe fire like the previous one, but instead launched massive ice projectiles. A new idea struck him, forcing him to make an even more drastic decision. This time, he didn't just sever his arms, he cut half of his own body. Using his body manipulation skill, Makoto directed his severed half toward the dragon, which swallowed it the moment it reached its mouth. Once Makoto was certain that the dragon had completely consumed him, he activated his skill to enhance the toxins stored in his body. The poison quickly spread throughout the dragon's system, causing it to weaken rapidly. At that moment, Makoto swiftly reconstructed his body at an incredible speed. Moments later, the dragon collapsed to the ground, lifeless, having succumbed to the poison. Makoto then apologized to it, stating that he simply did not have the time to engage in a direct battle. Due to his victory over this dragon as well, Makoto's level increased exponentially, making him confident that their next battle would be over in no time. Meanwhile, Minori was evading the relentless attacks from the hunters surrounding her, using her magic to stop them and prevent them from harming her. However, she felt deep sympathy for them, knowing that they were merely victims under someone else's control. Suddenly, she noticed a group of mages positioned in elevated areas, launching magical attacks at her. She countered them with her own magic, realizing that this battle would not end so easily. At that moment, one of the hypnotized hunters seized the opportunity to sneak up behind her, catching her off guard as he struck with his sword. The moment Minori was wounded, a large number of hunters rushed toward her, launching a coordinated assault. Feeling the overwhelming pressure of their numbers, Minori knew she couldn't retreat now. She could not allow them to win. Determined, she decided to use stronger magic. Without hesitation, she summoned the blazing black flame, allowing it to spread around her and engulf every hunter who had attacked her. But suddenly, she heard a weak voice pleading with her to stop. When she turned to look, she found one of the hunters severely burned by her magic, whispering in pain that if he were treated quickly, his wounds would not leave permanent scars. Minori was shaken upon seeing them in this state, realizing that the hypnosis forced them into absolute obedience, even when they were suffering terribly. Then, to her astonishment, despite their severe injuries, all the affected hunters began moving away from her, heading in a single direction. At the same time, Makoto was equally surprised to see all the raptors and dragons retreating from him, heading toward the same location as the hunters. He moved closer to his sister, both of them unable to comprehend what was happening, especially when they noticed a strange pink aura forming where everyone was gathering. From within that pink energy, Aya emerged. The moment Minori saw her, she immediately realized that she was the cause of everything. She declared that they had finally found them. Makoto noticed that Aya had arrived alone, prompting him to sarcastically remark that she must be very confident in her ability to handle the situation on her own. As she approached them, Makoto stepped in front of his sister protectively and asked Aya how she had managed to locate them now. Aya replied that she could share the senses of anyone she had previously hypnotized, though she avoided doing so often since it was exhausting for her. Hearing this, Makoto stood his ground, pointing out that she had come to face them alone, without Haruto by her side, calling it a bold move on her part. However, Aya responded with absolute confidence, stating that she did not need anyone else because she was completely certain that neither of them was a match for her. They simply could not defeat her. At that moment, Minori, overcome with rage, shouted and unleashed the Black Force spell, aiming a direct attack at Aya. The magic was immensely powerful, burning through everything in its path. But to their shock, Aya remained completely unharmed. Instead, she mockingly commented that it had been truly terrifying. It was then that Makoto and Minori realized the horrifying truth. In the instant Minori had launched her attack, Aya had used her mind control ability to force the injured hunters into forming a human shield in front of her. When Minori grasped what had just happened, she was struck by immense shock, bursting into tears as she lamented that Saya had controlled the girls, and now Aya was doing the same with the hunters. She questioned whether human lives meant nothing to them at all. Aya responded in a direct and ruthless manner. First, she finished off the remaining hunters herself, then turned to Minori and coldly stated that human lives truly meant nothing. She continued, affirming that the only things that mattered to her were her power and beauty. Everything else was nothing more than worthless trash in her eyes. Minori, her eyes brimming with tears, replied that the right to live should not be something that differentiates people, and that it was not right for the strong to devour the weak. Aya smirked mockingly, remarking that it was cute how Minori lived like a princess in a naive fairy tale, but now she was going to rip apart that rosy illusion. With that, Aya unleashed a powerful spell that engulfed the entire area, surrounding both Makoto and Minori. She laughed, declaring that she was about to turn their lives into complete chaos. Then, she began chanting a mysterious incantation, and within moments, the ground beneath them cracked open, separating the siblings from each other. Both were stunned, and Makoto frantically called out to his sister in sheer panic. However, Aya stepped closer to him and told him that he should be more concerned about himself first. She then grabbed his head and forced him to face her, locking eyes with him. In an instant, she began seizing control of his mind, successfully hypnotizing him. Suddenly, Minori saw her brother standing at the edge of the rift that separated them, but he was unaware of his actions. He had fallen completely under Aya's control. She desperately shouted his name, trying to wake him, but Aya had already secured her grip on his mind. Aya then drew closer to him, wrapping herself around him like a snake tightening its hold on its prey. In a taunting tone, she told him that he was incredibly lucky. He could keep his beauty and youth forever without lifting a finger. At that moment, Minori saw Aya holding her brother in such a way that she lunged at her, screaming at her to let go of him. But she was caught off guard when Aya used Makoto as a human shield this time. Realizing this too late, Minori found that the knife she had been holding had pierced her brother's body instead of Aya's. Aya sneered at her in amusement, mockingly saying how cruel it was for Minori to stab her own brother like that. It hardly suited the image of a kind-hearted girl. However, Minori quickly snapped out of her shock and immediately thrust her hand toward Aya, attempting to stab her. Aya, just as quick, issued an order through her mental control, commanding Makoto to attack his sister and defend her. Minori now stood face to face with her brother, desperately trying to wake him from his trance, pleading with him to remember who she was, but he remained completely unresponsive. Aya coldly told her that all of her efforts were futile. She then explained that the only person capable of breaking the hypnosis was the one who had cast it, meaning that Minori could do nothing unless she possessed stronger magic to break the spell, or unless she killed Aya herself. Suddenly, a crueler idea came to Aya's mind. She gave Makoto a direct command, ordering him to start fighting against his own sister. Immediately, Makoto lunged at Minori with relentless aggression. Minori tried to dodge his attacks, but he was far too strong, striking at her with full force until he knocked her to the ground, leaving her with multiple wounds. Aya then smirked wickedly and asked how it felt to watch the brother she loved now hate her in such a way. At that moment, Minori realized just how powerful Makoto was. If she didn't fight back seriously, her fate would be. So, in her heart, she silently apologized to him before making her decision to resist. She drew her knife, taking a battle stance, determined to defend herself until her brother could be freed from the hypnosis. But suddenly, Makoto stepped closer, his expression softening as he called her name with a gentle smile. Minori was stunned to see that he recognized her, but before she could process it, Makoto exploited her moment of hesitation and lunged at her with brutal speed and ferocity. He continued his relentless assault, striking her with overwhelming force, until he landed a devastating blow that sent her crashing to the ground once again. Minori remained sprawled on the ground as Makoto approached her, advancing toward her without hesitation. In that moment, she thought to herself that she couldn't do it. She could never bring herself to fight her older brother. As he neared, he suddenly grabbed her by the throat and began choking her. Minori felt immense pain, but instead of resisting, all she could think about was what she could do to save him. At that moment, Minori began recalling all the memories she had shared with her brother, all the times he had protected her and defended her with kindness. She also remembered their moments of sorrow, how they had made a promise to each other to grow stronger together, vowing never to let anything separate them. But now, Makoto was still gripping her throat tightly. She tried to speak, but no sound came out. Aya mockingly asked her what she was trying to say, but Minori kept struggling until she finally gathered her strength and screamed at her, declaring that she would kill her. She then continued, stating that this was what she had been trying to say all along, before calling Aya an ugly old hag. The moment Aya heard those words, she was consumed by uncontrollable rage, completely forgetting her desire to possess Minori. In her fury, she ordered Makoto to finish her off immediately. Makoto charged at his sister, but this time was different. Each time he took a step toward her, Minori severed one of his arms. Then, she apologized to her older brother, and finally made the decision to use her magic against him, unleashing the exploding black flame. As soon as she cast her spell, a massive explosion engulfed them both, placing them at the very heart of the catastrophic blast. Aya, reacting swiftly, activated a protective spell to shield herself from the explosion's effects. The blast had nearly harmed her, but she managed to save herself at the last possible moment. During those moments, Minori reflected on her past life, always believing that all she needed to do was follow her brother. She had thought that as long as he was by her side, he would take care of her and everything else, no matter what it was. But now, she realized that this was not enough, and for that reason, she chose to keep fighting. She launched a fierce assault on Makoto, severing his arms, then his legs, and even his head. No matter how many times he regenerated and attacked again, she did not stop. She continued fighting without hesitation. Despite the intensity of their battle, Minori could still feel his emotions as he fought against her. He was filled with sorrow, apologizing to her every time he struck. But in truth, she was the one who wanted to apologize to him for being weak, for always slowing him down. However, she resolved that this would never happen again. Without hesitation, she began killing her brother over and over, growing stronger each time, vowing that she would become powerful enough. Even so, she did not stop. She continued to slay her brother repeatedly, showing no hesitation or retreat, and with each cycle, her level rose even higher. Then, after everything, she ran to him and embraced him, even though he was unconscious and unaware of who she was. She told him that all of this was for the sake of saving her older brother. As she held on to him, she whispered that everything she had done was for him. Then, at that moment, she made her final decision, to detonate both of them together, using the most powerful magic she possessed. Having reached the peak of her strength, Aya watched everything unfold, and as the enormous explosion erupted, she wondered if Minori had completely lost her mind, choosing to destroy both her soul and her brother's. But of course, she did not care about the fate of the siblings, whether they had perished or not, as long as their blood became hers. However, the only thing that irritated her was that the density of the smoke from the explosion obscured her vision. At the very moment she needed to see clearly to collect their blood, she found herself unable to do so. At that instant, a shadow emerged from behind the thick smoke, and then she heard Minori's voice addressing her, stating that Aya had only made one mistake. She had assumed that Minori would never be able to fight her older brother. Moments later, Minori stepped out from within the smoke, telling Aya that ever since the day they escaped from the hell they had been trapped in, they had fought every person and monster that stood in their way, and from that time onward, she had been preparing for this very moment. Aya watched in astonishment as Minori emerged from the massive explosion completely unscathed, marveling at her overwhelming magical power. Then, Makoto appeared as well, thanking his sister for what she had done, telling her that he had always believed she would succeed. With that, the siblings were reunited once more. They then turned toward Aya, and Makoto declared that they were now ready to launch their counterattack against her.